She hadn't eaten in 2 days. But she'd die before letting a stranger know that. Ava Sterling had once signed contracts worth millions. She'd sat across boardroom tables from men who feared her sharp mind and sharper instincts. She had built something from nothing, and then watched someone she trusted burn it all to the ground, smiling while he did it. Now she was standing in a riverside restaurant, her 6-year-old daughter tugging at her sleeve asking if they could eat, and Ava was calculating whether she had enough in her purse to order 2 glasses of water without embarrassing herself. She didn't. If this story moves you, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Millbrook River restaurant sat at the edge of town like something that had been forgotten by progress, and was perfectly fine with that. It wasn't fancy. The menus were laminated and some of the letters had worn off the specials board. The ceiling fan turned too slowly to do any real good in August heat. But the tables were clean, the coffee was strong, and on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of summer, it was the kind of place where nobody looked twice at anyone. That was exactly why Ava had chosen it. She'd passed it twice already, once on foot, once sitting in her car for 11 minutes before telling herself she was being ridiculous and going inside. The car was a 2019 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a rear window that fogged up regardless of the season. It had been hers for 6 weeks, purchased off a private seller for $4,100 cash, which had taken a significant piece out of the savings she was trying so desperately to make last. She needed to make it last. There was no backup plan. Not anymore. "Mama, it smells good in here." Lily pressed her face against Ava's arm as they stepped through the door, the small overhead bell announcing their arrival to no one in particular. "Like pancakes." "It does," Ava agreed, because it did. Butter and maple syrup and something faintly sweet, probably pie crust, hanging in the warm air like a promise. Her stomach responded in a way she pretended not to notice. "Can we get pancakes?" "Let's sit down first, okay, baby?" The hostess, a teenager with a braid over one shoulder, led them to a small table near the window without asking if they preferred inside or outside. Ava didn't mind. The window seat was good. She could see the parking lot, the street, the bridge over the river. Old habit. Always know the exits. Always know who's coming. She helped Lily climb into the chair across from her and slid a paper placemat in front of her daughter. Lily immediately grabbed the crayon from the cup in the center of the table and began attacking the connect-the-dots maze on the back of the placemat with an enthusiasm that Ava found quietly heartbreaking. 6 years old, still capable of being completely absorbed by a paper maze and a crayon, still untouched by the particular gravity of what their life had become. Ava had spent 14 months trying to keep it that way. She picked up the menu and opened it. The prices were modest. This was not a fancy establishment, but her eyes went immediately to the left side of each item, the numbers column. She ran the quick, brutal math that had become as automatic as breathing. The apartment took what it took. The car insurance renewed in 3 weeks. Lily needed new shoes. Her toes were pressing against the front of the ones she had, and she hadn't said anything about it, which somehow made it worse. There was the matter of the phone bill, the matter of the electricity deposit that had been deferred once and couldn't be deferred again. And there was the job situation, which was its own category of complicated. "Mama, what are you getting?" "I'm looking." Ava didn't lift her eyes from the menu. "I want the silver dollar pancakes and orange juice. Can I have orange juice?" "We'll see." That means no. Ava looked up then. Lily was watching her with those dark, serious eyes that occasionally appeared in the middle of her daughter's ordinary 6-year-old face and made Ava's chest feel strange. Too old for her age sometimes, that kid. Picking things up from the air the way children did, absorbing the frequency of stress even when the adults around them believed they were hiding it successfully. "It means we'll see," Ava said, and kept her voice level. Lily seemed to accept this and returned to the maze. The waitress came by, middle-aged, moving with the specific efficiency of someone who had been doing this job long enough that it was simply part of her body, and set 2 glasses of water on the table. "Ready to order, hun, or do you need a few more minutes?" "A few more minutes," Ava said. The waitress moved on without ceremony. Ava did the math again. The silver dollar pancakes were $7.50. Orange juice was $3.25. Tax. She'd need to tip. She always tipped. She'd waitressed for 2 years in her early 20s, and she would tip if she had her last $10 in the world, which brought the total to somewhere between $14 and $15, depending. She had $22 in her wallet, which meant after this she would have approximately $7 until Friday, when her first paycheck from the temp agency was supposed to hit her account. Supposed to. She'd been told supposed to before. She could skip eating. Lily wouldn't notice if she ordered coffee and said she wasn't hungry. That had worked 3 times already this week. She was developing an almost theatrical ability to rearrange food on a plate to make it look like she'd eaten. It was a skill she wished she didn't have. "Okay," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "Okay." 3 tables over, Ethan Walker was trying to eat a Reuben sandwich and read a contract at the same time, which was not going particularly well. The contract was for a small manufacturing firm in the western part of the state. Potential client, decent-sized engagement if they moved forward, and it had 3 clauses in it that needed to be revised before he'd put his name on anything. He'd been staring at the same paragraph for 10 minutes. The sandwich was getting cold. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "Marcus, did you look at the Hargrove proposal yet?" He typed back, "Looking at something else. Give me an hour." Marcus, "You said that 2 hours ago." Ethan set the phone face down on the table and returned to the contract. He was not, by any external measurement, a man who spent a great deal of time looking at strangers in restaurants. He was 32 years old. He ran a consulting firm with 11 employees and more work than he'd honestly anticipated when he started it 4 years ago in his apartment with a secondhand laptop and a lot of stubborn determination. And he was by nature the kind of person who moved through spaces with his head down and his attention directed at whatever the current problem was. He noticed the woman and the little girl the way you noticed weather changing. Not deliberately, just a shift in the quality of the air. It was the stillness that caught him first. Most people moved through a restaurant with a kind of casual ease, settling in, glancing at phones, talking. The woman at the window table sat with the particular stillness of someone working very hard to appear at ease. Her back was straight. Her hands were flat on the table. She was looking at the menu the way people looked at something they were trying to make a decision about, but already knew what the decision was going to be. He'd sat like that once. In a diner outside Columbus, Ohio, 9 years ago, trying to calculate whether he could afford to order the soup. He'd been 23 years old, sleeping in his car, and he'd walked into that diner because it was February and he needed to be somewhere warm for an hour. He remembered the particular quality of that calculation. The way your face had to stay neutral while your brain was doing something desperate underneath. He wasn't staring. He wasn't watching. He was aware in the peripheral way that sometimes meant nothing and sometimes meant something, and he went back to his contract, and the next time he naturally glanced up, he saw the woman lean slightly across the table and say something quiet to her daughter, and the daughter looked up from her placemat with a small expression of disappointment quickly accepted, the way children accepted disappointment from parents they trusted. He put down the contract. He sat with it for a moment. He knew he could be wrong. He'd been wrong before. He'd offered help once, years ago, to a woman at a bus stop who he thought was struggling, and she had looked at him like he'd lost his mind and informed him that she was an architect waiting for her Uber. He'd apologized profusely and she'd laughed, and that had been fine. That had been embarrassing in a fine, forgettable way. But sometimes you recognize something. He caught the waitress as she passed his table. "Excuse me, the woman at the window table, can I cover their check? Whatever they order." The waitress looked at him. She was the kind of person who had seen enough in her years of work to not be easily surprised, but something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion, more like the careful measuring of intent. "You know her?" "No." "She know you're doing this?" "No, I'd rather she didn't actually, just, if it can be added to my bill?" The waitress looked at him for another beat. "She didn't order yet." "I know. Whatever she orders, and her daughter." Another pause. "All right," the waitress said, and moved on. Ethan picked up his contract. He didn't look at the window table again. He should have anticipated that it wouldn't go that smoothly. He heard the conversation from 3 tables away. Not the words, not at first, but the tone. The waitress explaining something. the woman's voice going quiet in a way that wasn't soft, more like compressed. And then a silence, and then he heard his own general direction indicated. He looked up. The woman was standing. She was about 5'5", with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd had it up since early morning and hadn't thought about it since. She was wearing a light blue button-down shirt that was clean and pressed and slightly too big for her. Not her shirt originally, maybe, or bought before she lost weight she hadn't planned on losing. Her face was composed with a rigidity that indicated the composure was costing her something. She walked directly to his table. He stood up. He wasn't entirely sure why. Reflex, maybe. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "I was told you offered to pay for our meal." "I did," he said. "You don't have to accept it." "I won't." She held his gaze without flinching. "But I wanted to tell you that directly." "Okay. My daughter and I are fine." "All right." She seemed to have prepared for more resistance than that because she paused. A slight adjustment behind her eyes, recalibrating. "I don't know you," she said. "You don't," he agreed. "People don't do things like this without wanting something." He held her gaze. "Some do. Not in my experience." "I'm sorry about your experience," he said. He meant it simply, without weight, the way you might mean it if you were being straightforward instead of strategic. "I'm not going to argue with you about it. If you'd prefer to handle your own check, please do. He paused. "I've sat in that particular seat before, that's all. Not literally, but you know what I mean." Something crossed her face. It was brief and quickly put away. "You don't know anything about my situation," she said. "No," he said. "I don't." Another pause. She was looking at him like she was trying to find the angle, the hidden mechanism, the thing behind the thing. He let her look. He'd learned a long time ago that you couldn't argue people out of that. Either they eventually saw something that made them reconsider, or they didn't, and pushing on it only made it worse. "I appreciate the gesture," she said finally. The words were careful, calibrated. "You don't have to." She looked at him for one more moment, then, "Have a good afternoon." "You too." She turned and walked back to the window table, sat down, and leaned forward to say something to her daughter. Lily, though Ethan didn't know her name yet, looked over at him with the frank, unselfconscious curiosity of a child, and he gave her a small wave. She waved back before her mother gently redirected her attention. They ordered. He didn't know what. He paid his own bill 40 minutes later and left. In the car, heading back toward his office on the north side of town, he tried to figure out why he couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't pity. He was clear on that. Pity was when you looked at someone and felt fortunate by comparison, and that wasn't what this was. This was more like recognition. The thing he'd felt in that diner outside Columbus, lying on the other side of the equation now. Someone had bought his soup that day. An older man, 2 stools down at the counter, who hadn't made a production of it, had just said something quiet to the woman behind the register and paid for it and left before Ethan had finished eating. He'd never found out why. He'd never been able to ask. He'd thought about it for years. He'd been thinking about it in one way or another ever since. He pulled into the parking garage at his office building and sat in the car for a minute with the engine running. She'd said, "People don't do things like this without wanting something," and she'd meant it, not as rudeness, as a fact she had arrived at through experience she hadn't invited. The kind of fact that got carved into you not by cynicism, but by specific, named events that you could still locate in your chest if you pressed on the right spot. He knew that fact too. He'd believed it himself, once. For several years, actually, in his mid-20s, when everything had collapsed and he'd rebuilt himself incrementally on a foundation that included a lot of trust no one as structural support. He'd been wrong about it eventually. Not all at once. In pieces. He turned off the engine and went inside. The afternoon in the restaurant had cost Ava more than the money she hadn't spent. Driving home, a 20-minute route she had memorized down to the specific potholes on Dunmore Avenue, she kept her eyes on the road and her hands at 10 and 2 and her jaw set in a way that was giving her a headache. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat within 5 minutes of buckling in, the way small children did when they'd been on their best behavior for too long and exhaustion finally won out. They'd eaten. She'd ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a soup and half sandwich combination, and told Lily the pancakes were for Sunday morning special occasion breakfasts only, which was a rule she'd invented on the spot and would now have to maintain indefinitely. Lily had ordered grilled cheese without complaint. They'd eaten quickly, without ceremony, and Ava had left a tip that was $1 more than she could comfortably afford and had felt both proud of herself and slightly deranged for it. The man. Ethan. She didn't know his name then, wouldn't know it for weeks. She thought about what he'd said. I've sat in that particular seat before. The thing she hated most was that she'd believed him, not because he seemed trustworthy. She'd trusted trustworthy-seeming people and been destroyed for it, but because of the way he said it, without performing it, without tilting his head sympathetically or adopting the specific softness of someone who wanted to be seen being kind. He'd said it the way you said something that was simply true, and then he'd let it sit there without building on it. That bothered her more than if he'd been obviously calculating. She knew how to handle obvious. She turned onto Dunmore and navigated the second pothole. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building that had been built in the 70s and renovated partially and inadequately in the early 2000s. The elevator worked maybe 60% of the time. The hallway on her floor smelled like someone's cooking, tonight something with onions and garlic. And the carpet runner down the center was the color of dried mustard and had been there longer than the building manager, who was a quiet man named Gerald, who fixed things slowly but always eventually. She carried Lily up the stairs on her hip, which was harder than it used to be. Lily was 44 pounds now and growing, and got them both inside and got Lily onto the couch with a blanket before she let herself sit down on the floor with her back against the kitchen cabinets. Just for a minute. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. 14 months ago, she had been the CEO of a company she'd built from a 5-person startup into something with a real board and real revenue and a reputation she'd bled for across 8 years. She'd had a corner office with a view and a team of people she genuinely respected and a daughter in a school with good teachers who knew Lily's name. She'd had all of it. And then Marcus Hale, not Ethan's Marcus, another one, a man with better suits and worse intentions, had used her company's worst quarter against her, had used the confidences she'd shared with him during a period when she'd believed they were building something together, personally, professionally, both braided together in the messy way they sometimes got, and turned those confidences into leverage, had maneuvered the board, had orchestrated her exit from her own company so smoothly and with such a convincing narrative about her instability and erratic decision-making that 2 people she'd worked alongside for 5 years hadn't returned her calls. She'd fought it. Of course she'd fought it. She'd consulted attorneys and spent money she couldn't afford and written letters and made phone calls and done everything that was supposed to constitute fighting back. And in the end, she'd been left with a legal settlement that prevented her from discussing the specifics, a reputation in her industry that had a particular flavor of doubt attached to it, enough to make potential employers hesitate, not enough to be provably wrong, and a daughter to raise alone because Lily's father had been absent since Lily was 2 years old and had not made any effort to change that status. So she'd moved, started over somewhere smaller, somewhere cheaper, somewhere nobody knew the name Ava Sterling as anything other than a name on a rental application. And she was rebuilding. She was. She had a plan. The temp agency was a temporary situation. The name said as much. She had a resume that she'd carefully edited to emphasize certain periods and skills without lying. Not exactly. And she was applying to positions, and she would land one. She would. She just needed to not fall apart in the meantime. And she specifically needed to not accept help from strangers in restaurants, because help from people she didn't know was how this had all started. And she was done with that particular lesson. She lowered her hands from her eyes. Lily was snoring softly on the couch. Small and certain, one arm hanging off the edge, fingers curled loosely toward the floor. "Okay," Ava said quietly to the room. "Okay." The thing about rebuilding from a particular kind of ruin was that it happened in very small increments that were invisible to everyone around you, and you had to find a way to measure them yourself, or you went crazy. Ava had developed a system. Every evening, before she went to sleep, she wrote 3 things in a small notebook she'd bought at a dollar store. Not gratitude. She'd tried the gratitude journal thing and found it made her feel vaguely patronized, like someone was patting her on the head. Just 3 things that had happened that day that were the result of decisions she'd made, progress she'd caused, evidence of agency. Tonight she wrote, 1. Did not accept money from stranger. 2. Lily ate a full meal. 3. Sent 3 applications. She looked at the first one. She wasn't entirely sure it was a victory. She was annoyed at herself for not being sure. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. The second time she saw Ethan Walker, she almost didn't recognize him. It was 4 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in Millbrook Park, the big one on the east side with the duck pond and the wooden playground equipment that was weathered but solid and beloved by children who had opinions about playgrounds. Lily had opinions about playgrounds. They'd made it to the park twice in the past month. The first time had been a calculated effort to give Lily something normal, something that cost nothing, something that felt like a life rather than a waiting room. The second time, today, was because Lily had asked, and asking was a thing Ava encouraged, even when the answers were sometimes no, and today the answer was yes. The playground was half full with the usual Saturday composition. A cluster of parents on benches at the perimeter, monitoring with varying degrees of attention. A grandfather pushing a very small child on a swing with the steady, patient repetition of someone who had done this before and found it meditative rather than tedious. 2 older kids, maybe 9 or 10, who were very clearly mid-negotiation about some playground rule dispute and conducting it with the gravity of a congressional hearing. Ava was on one of the perimeter benches, watching Lily attack the climbing structure with single-minded ambition when she became aware of someone settling onto the far end of the same bench. She looked over. The man from the restaurant. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the playground with a moderately distracted expression, the look of a parent monitoring for safety without hovering, which prompted her to look for, yes, a boy, maybe 7 or 8, who was currently standing at the top of the slide trying to convince himself to go down it head first. "Don't," the man said, not raising his voice. The boy looked over, assessed, decided against it, not because he'd been told, it seemed, but because he'd independently arrived at the same conclusion. He turned around and went down feet first with considerable speed and a small shriek of delight. The man watched, then looked over and met Ava's eyes. She could see the exact moment he placed her. "Hey," he said. "Hi," she said. A pause. He looked back at the playground. "The slide kid is yours?" she asked. "Yeah, that's Owen. He's very confident in his physical abilities, which is—" He paused. A mixed blessing. Despite herself, she almost smiled. "How old?" 7? 8 in November. He watched as Owen careened off the end of the slide and immediately turned around to climb back up. "You've got the girl on the climbing structure?" "Lily, she's 6. Owen was like that at 6, that total absorption thing, like the playground is the only thing in the universe. "Yeah." Ava watched her daughter, who was now attempting to navigate a rope bridge with the focused deliberateness of a surgeon. "It's a good quality, I think. I'm trying to protect it." She hadn't meant to say that. It had arrived in her mouth fully formed and exited before she could decide whether to let it. He didn't respond immediately, which she appreciated. He seemed like a person who understood that not everything required a response. "I'm Ethan," he said after a moment. "Ava? I know this is a little strange given—" "It's a small town," she said. "Running into people happens." He nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm not—" He stopped, seemed to decide against whatever he'd been about to say. "Never mind." "What?" "I was going to say I'm not following you around or anything, but saying that out loud sounds more alarming than not saying it, so—" She did smile at that, briefly, without meaning to. It surprised her. "I didn't think you were," she said. "Okay, good." They sat in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable kind, or not entirely. Owen had recruited Lily into some kind of game that involved running in an irregular pattern around the base of the climbing structure, and the 2 children were operating on a frequency entirely their own, conducting an entire social universe in real time that the adults on the bench could observe but not fully access. He's good at making friends, Ava said. Too good sometimes. He'll talk to literally anyone. Ethan's voice carried the particular combination of pride and fear that was apparently standard issue for parents of extroverted children. She's not. Ava watched Lily, who was grinning now, matching Owen's irregular running pattern with her own interpretation of it. She's careful. Takes her a while. Smart quality to have. There was no judgment in it, and she wondered if she was being too sensitive, looking for subtext where there wasn't any, the way she'd been doing for over a year with everyone she met. The restaurant, she said, because she'd decided to address it directly because she always preferred direct. I was short with you. You weren't, he said. I was. You were direct, he said. That's different. She looked at him. He was looking at this playground again, at Owen, who had now convinced Lily to attempt the slide and was coaching her through it with the bossy encouragement of a second grader who considered himself an expert. Why did you do it? She asked. The meal thing. A pause. I told you, I recognized something. From your own life. Yeah. What happened to you? He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, thinking about how to answer it accurately. Lost everything I had when I was 23, he said. I didn't lose it dramatically. I just didn't have it. Came from nothing, went looking for something, found out it was harder than I expected, and I wasn't as prepared as I thought. Spent about 18 months not knowing where I was going to sleep. He glanced at her. Not looking for sympathy, just answering your question. She'd expected deflection or a more curated version of the story. The specificity surprised her. Someone helped you, she said. Someone bought me soup, he said, in a diner in Ohio, and I thought about it for years. Why they did it, what it cost them. He shrugged, one shoulder, slightly. I don't know. When I see something I recognize, I try to do something about it. I'm not always right about what I'm seeing, but I'd rather be wrong about it than right and do nothing. Ava sat with that. I wasn't wrong, was I? He said. It wasn't quite a question. She didn't answer it. I have a job interview on Monday, she said instead. Yeah? Administrative coordinator position at Actually, I don't know the company. Staffing agency sent me the information. She paused. It's a step back from where I was, but it's a job. Steps back that are actually steps forward, he said. Look like steps back from the outside. Is that a quote from something? I don't think so. It might be. I might have gotten it off a coffee mug at some point and absorbed it. She almost laughed again. It felt strange and slightly foreign in her chest, like a language she'd spoken fluently once and was relearning from rustiness. They sat there for another 40 minutes, watching their children conduct the business of childhood. And Ava didn't think about money once during that entire time, which was the first 40-minute stretch in approximately 4 months, during which that particular calculation had not been running in some background process of her brain. She thought about that later. Just that. Just the absence of it. On Monday morning, she put on her best interview outfit, a charcoal blazer she'd kept through everything because it was the one thing she couldn't bring herself to part with, and drove to the address the staffing agency had given her. Walker Consulting Group occupied the 4th and 5th floors of a building on Mercer Street with clean lines and the particular calm of a workspace that had been deliberately designed to not feel corporate. Small plants on the windowsills. Good light. A receptionist who looked up and smiled without the professional vacancy that some receptionists deployed. Ava Sterling, she said. I have a 10:30. Of course, the receptionist said. I'll let them know you're here. Ava sat down in one of the waiting chairs and looked at the name on the frosted glass door at the end of the hallway. Ethan Walker, founder and CEO. She stared at it for a long time. He was not in the room for the interview. The interview was conducted by a woman named Dana Chen, who was the company's operations director and whose questions were sharp and practical and whose assessment of Ava's answers seemed thorough rather than performative. It was a real interview, not a formality. Ava answered every question honestly. At the end, Dana Chen said, We had Ethan review your resume before we brought you in. He thought you were overqualified to be direct. But overqualified candidates who are serious about the role tend to outperform expectations in my experience. Are you serious about this role? Yes, Ava said. Why are you applying for an administrative position with your background? Ava had prepared for this question. She'd rehearsed 3 different answers. She looked at Dana Chen across the desk and chose the honest one instead. Because I need a job that pays me reliably to do work I'm capable of doing well, in an environment where the expectations are clear and the organization is legitimate. I'm rebuilding. This is part of that. Dana Chen looked at her for a moment. That's the best answer I've heard to that question, she said, in about 6 years of asking it. On her way out, Ava passed the frosted glass door. She stopped, knocked. Silence. She almost walked away. Then the door opened. Ethan looked at her with an expression that was carefully, specifically neutral. Not performing surprise, but not pretending he'd expected this either. You could have told me, she said. At the park. You knew I had an interview here Monday. I found out Saturday morning, he said. Dana sent me your resume for sign-off. I didn't put your name to your face until I saw you sitting in the lobby just now. She studied him. I swear, he said, if you were engineering this, I wasn't. He held her gaze without flinching. I genuinely didn't put it together until this morning. And then I made a decision to stay out of the interview completely, because if you got this job, I wanted it to be because Dana hired you, not because I waved at you across a playground. Ava said nothing for a moment. The job is good work, Ethan said. It's not charity. There's a contract, a salary, standard benefits. Dana runs that team. It has nothing to do with me on a day-to-day basis. I know, she said. She's good. She's excellent. A beat. I'll let you know what I decide, Ava said. That's all I'd ask, he said. She walked down the hallway, past the receptionist who smiled again, and pressed the elevator button and waited. Behind her, through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouette of him sitting back down. She stood there until the elevator came. She hadn't decided anything yet. But something she'd been carrying for 14 months, some specific, dense, heavy thing she'd gotten so used to that she'd stopped noticing the weight of it, had shifted by approximately 3 degrees, and she was aware of the difference, and she didn't quite know what to do with that yet. The elevator opened. She got in. And for the first time in a very long time, she had no idea what came next, and found to her surprise that the uncertainty didn't feel entirely like danger. It felt like something else. She wasn't ready to name it, but it was there. She took 3 days to decide. Not because the decision was genuinely unclear. She knew by the end of the first day that she was going to accept the position, if Dana offered it, which Dana did on Tuesday morning in a call that lasted 4 minutes and contained no small talk. But she needed the 3 days to examine the decision from every angle she could think of, to look for the trap, to identify the mechanism by which this would eventually be used against her. She found nothing. That bothered her more than finding something would have. The offer was, as Ethan had said, completely standard, a written contract, a salary that was less than she'd been making 4 years ago and more than she'd been making in the past 14 months. Benefits that kicked in after 60 days. Clear reporting structure. She'd report to Dana Chen, not to Ethan, which Dana had actually specified without being asked, in a way that suggested she'd anticipated the question. The scope of the role was defined. The expectations were stated plainly. There was nothing in the language that was unusual, nothing that a reasonable person with a law degree and a reason to be suspicious could point to and say, there it is. She'd read it 4 times. She'd read it once more on Thursday morning with Lily at school and a cup of coffee going cold on the table beside her. Then she signed it. She called Dana and said, I'll see you Monday. Good, Dana said. Wear comfortable shoes. The first week involves a lot of walking. She didn't call Ethan. She didn't feel the need to. It wasn't his business, technically. The hire was Dana's. That boundary had been established, and she was going to treat it like it meant something. Because if it didn't mean something, then she needed to know that early, and the only way to test it was to act as if it were real. She went to pick up Lily from school that afternoon and told her they were going to celebrate. Celebrate what? Lily asked. I got a job. Lily thought about this. A real one? Like every day? Every day. Do you get to wear your nice blazer? Ava laughed. A real one, surprised out of her. Sometimes, yeah. Good, Lily said, with the decisive satisfaction of someone who had very specific views about professional attire. You look good in it. They got ice cream from a truck near the park and sat on a bench while Lily worked through a scoop of birthday cake flavor with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about. Ava had plain chocolate and didn't think about the cost of it until later, and by then she'd decided not to count it against herself. Small things. She was trying to let herself have small things. The first week at Walker Consulting was exactly what Dana had warned her about: a significant amount of movement. The administrative coordinator role was, in practice, the connective tissue of the organization. Ava managed schedules, coordinated between project teams, handled client communications at the intake level, and did approximately 40 other things that weren't in the job description but were clearly part of the actual job. She understood this kind of work. She'd built organizations from the inside, and she knew which functions held everything together while everyone else focused on the visible parts. She was good at it, better than good, and she knew it within the first 3 days. Not with arrogance, but with the plain recognition of a person who has found a task they can do well and is relieved to have found it. Dana noticed. She didn't make a production of it. She wasn't that kind of manager. But on Friday of the first week, she stopped by Ava's desk and said, "The Hargrove intake package you restructured. I've been getting it formatted 3 different ways by 3 different people for the past 8 months, and yours is the first version where everything is in the right place." "I just standardized it," Ava said. "That's what restructured means." Dana looked at her briefly. "Good first week." She walked away before Ava could respond, which was, Ava was coming to understand, Dana's standard operating procedure: concise, accurate, moving. She liked her. She was careful about liking her, the way she was careful about everything, but she liked her. Ethan Walker existed in her peripheral awareness for the first month in the specific way that a boss exists when you're trying to calibrate how much they're actually paying attention. He was present in the office on most days, moving between the 5th floor, where his own office was, and the 4th floor, where the project teams and her desk lived. He said good morning when their paths crossed, asked once if she'd found the parking situation workable, and made no reference whatsoever to restaurants or parks or any prior contact. She appreciated this. She also noticed it more than she expected to. The first time he appeared in her direct line of work was 3 weeks in, when he forwarded her an email from a long-term client named Prescott with the note, "Can you handle the follow-up scheduling on this? Prescott is particular about his time. Dana can give you background if needed. Brief, practical." No performance of familiarity. She replied, "On it," and handled it. Prescott turned out to be a retired industrial engineer in his mid-60s who communicated primarily through email, expected responses within 4 hours during business days, and had very specific opinions about how meeting agendas should be formatted. He was not difficult. She'd worked with genuinely difficult clients and knew the difference. He was just precise. She matched his precision, and he became, within 2 exchanges, completely straightforward to work with. When she mentioned this to Dana, Dana looked slightly surprised. It took Marcus 4 months to figure out how to email him without it turning into a production. "You just have to speak the same language," Ava said. "Most people don't bother figuring out what the language is." Ava shrugged. She'd always been better at reading people than she gave herself credit for. It was one of the things that had made her effective as a CEO and had also, she acknowledged privately, made her vulnerable to Marcus Hale, because reading people accurately required a certain openness to them, and Marcus had been skilled at presenting exactly what she was looking for. She shut that particular line of thought down before it went anywhere useful. The day she learned anything real about Ethan Walker, not the managed surface-level professionalism, but something with actual weight to it, happened by accident, the way most real information did. It was a Wednesday afternoon in October, the first genuinely cold day of the season, and she'd stayed late to finish a project timeline that needed to go out before the end of the week. The 4th floor had emptied out by 6. She was at her desk with the overhead lights off and her desk lamp on, because she worked better in smaller light, and she was most of the way through the timeline when she heard voices coming down the stairwell from the 5th floor. Not arguing, exactly, but not easy conversation either. She wasn't eavesdropping. They were in the stairwell, which opened directly near her workspace, and the building had a way of carrying sound. She heard Ethan's voice first, measured in that way she'd come to recognize as his version of controlled, and then another voice, male, someone she didn't recognize. "You could have told me before the meeting," the other voice said, "not in front of the client." "I addressed a factual error in front of the client," Ethan said. "If you're upset about it, I understand that, but I wasn't going to let the wrong numbers stand. It made me look incompetent. The wrong numbers would have made both of us look incompetent and misled the client, which is worse." A pause. "There's a way to handle things internally." "There is," Ethan said, and his voice was quiet now, the kind of quiet that carried more weight than volume. "And when it's possible, I prefer that. Today, it wasn't possible, and I made a call. You can tell me I was wrong about that. I'll listen. But I won't tell you the client didn't need to hear accurate numbers because they did." Another pause. Longer. "I've been with this company 3 years," the other man said. "I know that. That's why I'm standing here having this conversation instead of letting HR handle it." The stairwell door opened, and she heard footsteps going past the fourth-floor landing without entering, heading down toward the lobby. A few seconds later, the stairwell door opened again more quietly, and she heard different footsteps stop. Then Ethan's voice, matter of fact, "I can see your lamp from the landing." She turned around. He was standing in the doorway to the stairwell. He looked tired. Not dramatically, just the specific tiredness of a person who'd had a long day that had gotten longer at the end. "Sorry," she said. "I wasn't trying to—" "It's fine." He came into the room and sat down on the edge of a desk 3 feet from hers, with the ease of someone who owned the furniture and wasn't performing casualness about it. "How's the timeline coming?" 80% there." "Good. Don't stay too late." "I'm almost done." She paused. "I wasn't eavesdropping." "I know." He glanced toward the stairwell door. "That's Garrett. He's been with us since almost the beginning. He's good at the work and bad at being corrected. I've been working on it." A beat. "Neither of those things is simple." "No," she said. She turned back to her screen. He sat there for a moment in the way that someone sat when they weren't quite ready to move on, but weren't making it into anything. And then he said, "I handled it wrong probably. The meeting part. Dana would have found a smoother way." She looked at him. He wasn't fishing for reassurance. He was just saying it, the same way he said things, plain, without decoration. "Maybe," she said. "But the client had the right numbers." He looked at her briefly. "Yeah." He stood up. "Good night, Ava." "Good night." She heard him on the stairs, and then the building was quiet again, just the hum of the heating system and the city outside doing its ordinary evening things. And she sat there for a moment before she went back to the timeline. She'd worked for people her whole career. She'd worked for good ones and mediocre ones and one genuinely terrible one, and what she was collecting, working here, was a series of small data points about Ethan Walker that she was not quite ready to draw conclusions from. He was fair, but not easy. He corrected without cruelty and admitted error without theater. He ran a company that had 11 people in it who, from what she'd observed, mostly liked working there, which was a rarer thing than it sounded. He also made mistakes. Garrett was right that there had probably been a better way. Ethan had acknowledged it himself to a woman he barely knew, because it was true, and he'd rather say it was true than pretend it wasn't. She filed this. She was still filing things. She wasn't done building the picture. The months settled into a shape. Lily started loving her school. This was not a thing that happened immediately. It took until November, until a girl named Sophie became Lily's particular person at recess. And then it happened fast in the way children's friendships did, total and serious and conducted with the gravity of a long-term commitment. Ava watched this from the outside with the relief of a parent who had spent too long watching their child navigate uncertainty and was now observing something taking root. The apartment was still the apartment. The elevator still worked 60% of the time, and Gerald, the building manager, still fixed things slowly and always eventually. But Ava had started to think of it as a place rather than a temporary situation, which was a different kind of thinking. She was slowly becoming someone who was not constantly managing emergency. She didn't trust it, but she was aware of it. At work, she had become, by month 3, more or less indispensable in the specific quiet way that organizational people became indispensable. Not visible in the headline-making sense, but woven into the function of the place so thoroughly that when she took a sick day in November, the workflow developed 2 separate tangles that required Dana to untangle them personally. Dana told her this when she came back. "Take sick days when you're sick," Dana said, "but I wanted you to know what happened so you understand what you're actually doing here." Ava understood. She'd been on the other end of this. She'd had people on her team whose absence revealed what they'd been quietly holding together. It was its own kind of compliment. She got a raise at the 3-month mark. She hadn't expected it. Dana presented it without ceremony as a contract adjustment reflecting the actual scope of what her role had become, which was more than the original job description and warranted different compensation. There was paperwork. She signed it. She still hadn't told Ethan anything about herself. Not the real version. He knew her name and that she was a single mother and that she was capable, and that she'd once said, "I'm rebuilding," to Dana Chen in a job interview. She didn't know how much Dana had shared. She hadn't asked. She was aware that this was a kind of holding position, that she was waiting for something, evidence maybe that the shape of things was what it appeared to be rather than what she was afraid it might secretly be. She'd been fooled by apparent safety before. She was slower now. There was nothing wrong with being slower. Well, the conversation that changed things between them. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of revelation, but in the specific way that a foundation shifts when a crack gets acknowledged, happened on a Thursday in late November. She was in the small kitchen on the 4th floor, making coffee at 7:45 in the morning because she'd gotten in early to get ahead of a Tuesday that was going to be complicated. Ethan came in 5 minutes after she did, and they coexisted in the kitchen in the way coworkers coexisted. Comfortable silence, the familiar small choreography of the coffee machine, and the mugs and the brief negotiations about counter space. Then he said, not looking at her, looking at his coffee, "How are you actually doing?" She looked at him. "Not a work question," he said. "Not—" He paused. "You don't have to answer. I just realized I've never asked." She should have deflected. She was good at deflecting. She had a full wardrobe of deflections, fitted and well-maintained, available in every social situation. Instead, she said, "Some days are harder than others." He nodded. "Yeah." "The job helps," she said. "Having something that's mine again, that I'm earning." She stopped. The words had gone slightly further than she'd intended. "Sorry. You didn't need all of that." "I asked," he said. She wrapped both hands around her mug and leaned against the counter. "I had a company," she said. "You probably figured that out, from my resume." "Dana mentioned your background, yes." "Someone took it from me." She said it the way she'd been practicing saying it, which was flat and factual, without the tremor that used to live in the sentence. Not, "He didn't steal it. He maneuvered it. Used things I told him in private to build a narrative about me to the board. Made himself look like a reasonable voice of concern while I looked like a problem." She paused. "The board believed him, or found it convenient to believe him. I was always clear on which it was." Ethan was quiet. "So I moved," she said. "Started from the beginning. Again." She looked at him. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I'm tired of talking around it like it's something I did wrong." "It wasn't something you did wrong," he said. "No, it wasn't. People like that—" He stopped. She could see him choosing words. "They're specifically skilled at identifying what's valuable in someone and figuring out how to use it. That's not a reflection of your judgment being bad. It's a reflection of someone having practiced that particular skill on multiple people." She looked at him. "You sound like you know." "I've met versions of him," he said. "In my industry. Watched it happen to people I worked with." He looked down at his coffee. "Not the same as having it happen to you, but I've been close enough to recognize what it looks like." She didn't say anything. "The company you built," he said. "What was it?" She hesitated. Then, "Management consulting, small to mid-sized businesses. I specialized in organizational restructuring during transition periods." She paused. "Mergers, leadership changes, rapid growth." She looked at him. I know. Ironic. He almost smiled. A little. I was good at it, she said, and the sentence came out with more edge than she'd intended. Not at him, just the residue of having had to defend that claim in her own head for 14 months. I'm not saying it defensively. I was good at the work. I know, he said. You don't know. You hired me to manage schedules and coordinate intake packets. I hired you because you were overqualified and serious, he said, and because in 3 months you've done more for how this office functions than the 3 people who held that role before you combined. He paused. Dana's words. She's not generous with those. Ava was quiet. I'm not saying this to make you feel better, he said, and she heard the particular flatness that meant he was being precise rather than kind. I'm saying it because it's accurate and because I think you've spent long enough having people misrepresent what you're worth to them. She didn't have an answer for that. He pushed off the counter and picked up his mug. Good coffee, he said. It's the same coffee we always make. Seems better this morning. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, what he did to you, the man who took your company, that says something about him. It says nothing about you. He looked at her briefly. And I think you already know that. I just thought it deserved saying out loud by someone other than yourself. He left. She stood in the kitchen with her mug and the coffee machine making its small sound, and the morning light coming through the narrow window over the sink, and she stood there long enough that she was late getting back to her desk, which was unusual for her. She sat down and opened her calendar and looked at the day ahead, and somewhere in the process of doing that, she noticed that the thing she'd been carrying, the specific vigilance, the constant assessment, the waiting for the mechanism to reveal itself, had shifted again, further this time, in the direction of something that felt like ground under her feet rather than ceiling above her head. She didn't relax. She wasn't ready to relax. But she stopped holding her breath quite as tightly. December came, and with it the particular quality of winter that settled over the town like a long exhale. The days got shorter. Lily developed a strong opinion about which boots were acceptable for which occasions that Ava found both exasperating and secretly impressive. The office holiday party was small. Dinner at a place on the waterfront. 11 people and Dana's husband, who was a quiet, dry-humored man who taught high school chemistry and had an excellent ability to sit in any social situation and be genuinely content. Ava went because it would have been strange not to, and because she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she wanted to. She sat next to Marcus, who was Ethan's operations lead, and who she'd been working alongside for 3 months, and had formed a comfortable professional rapport with Marcus Kellerman, who had nothing in common with Marcus Hale, except the first name, and had in fact been instrumental in making her first weeks at the company workable by explaining the unwritten rules of the office culture with the generous specificity of someone who'd had to figure them out himself at one point. You've been here, what, 3 months? He said, over the bread course. Almost exactly. You know what Ethan said about you in the last team check-in? She looked at him. I wasn't aware there was a team check-in where I was discussed. It's not gossip. He said, in the context of talking about the operations review, that the intake process was working better than it had since he'd founded the company. Marcus paused. He didn't say your name. He said, the work on intake. But Dana looked at you when he said it. Ava looked down at her bread plate. He could have said the name. He's careful about that stuff, Marcus said. He doesn't single people out in team meetings unless he's correcting something, positive or negative. He thinks it makes the room weird. Does it? Honestly? Kind of, yeah. But it also means nobody's jockeying for specific credit, which makes the team less political. He picked up his roll. I've worked places where the political situation was so bad, people were literally sabotaging each other's work. Once. Pharmaceutical sales. Don't ask. He shook his head at the memory. This place is not that. No, she agreed. It's not. He's not perfect, Marcus said, in the way people offered caveats when they were fundamentally defending something. He can be frustrating when he's set on a direction. He doesn't always communicate the full picture before making a call. The Garrett thing last month. I was there for part of that, she said. Yeah, he mentioned it, said he handled it imperfectly. Marcus looked at her. He admitted that to you? In passing. He doesn't do that readily, Marcus said. Not with admiration, just observation. He's working on it. The past couple of years he's gotten better at saying when he got something wrong. He used to just quietly try to fix it and move on, which is its own kind of infuriating. She filed this too. She was still building the picture. Dinner went on, easy and unforced. Someone told a story about a client situation that had gone wrong in an objectively funny way. Dana's husband explained, when asked, the specific chemical properties of the reaction that made the Mentos and soda thing work, with an enthusiasm that was clearly genuine. Ethan mostly listened, said things occasionally that were specific and made people laugh, and looked, Ava thought, like a person who was at ease. Not performed ease, but the actual thing, the kind that you couldn't sustain if it wasn't real. She caught herself watching him at one point and made herself stop. On the way home, Lily was with her neighbor's daughter for the evening, a rare thing that required planning and was worth it. And Ava drove home through streets that were wet with the beginning of something that wasn't quite rain and parked and sat in the car for a minute. She'd been in this town for just over a year now. She'd rebuilt something, not everything, not the things she'd lost, which she was starting to understand she might never get back in the same form, and was slowly accepting might not need to be the same form, but something real, something that had her name on it. She went upstairs, turned on the lamp in the living room, and sat down with her notebook. She wrote 3 things. She looked at the third one for a while, laughed at dinner, without thinking about it first. She put the notebook away. She lay awake for a while in the dark, listening to the building breathe its nighttime sounds, pipes and wind and someone's television on the floor below. And she thought about the restaurant 14 months ago and the woman she'd been then, calculating the cost of a glass of water. That woman hadn't been weak. She'd been in a specific kind of survival that required everything she had and left nothing for anything else. The distance between that seat and this one was 14 months, and a series of things she hadn't chosen but had gotten through anyway, and some things she had chosen. The job, the apartment, the decision on a Monday morning to knock on a frosted glass door and say, "You could have told me," to a man who had, she now knew with reasonable certainty, genuinely not connected her face to her resume until she was already sitting in the lobby. She thought about what he'd said in the kitchen. That says something about him. It says nothing about you. She'd told herself that. She'd said it in therapy before she'd had to stop going for financial reasons. She'd written it in the notebook on 3 separate occasions in slightly different forms. But there was something different about hearing it from someone else. Someone who wasn't invested in her healing, who wasn't being paid to reframe her narrative, who just said it because they were making coffee, and it was true, and they thought it deserved being said out loud. She would not make too much of it. She was not a person who made too much of things anymore. She'd burned that capacity out at 31 in a boardroom she never went back to. But she noticed it. She noticed it the same way she'd noticed in October that 40 minutes by a playground had gone by without the money calculation running. Small evidence of something changing, the kind of small evidence that was easy to dismiss and important not to. She turned over and looked at the ceiling. Outside, the almost rain had decided to commit and was coming down properly now, the kind of steady December rain that wasn't cold enough for snow but wasn't warm enough for anything else. It came against the window in small bursts and then steadied. Ava listened to it for a long time. Then she slept. January was uneventful in the way that mattered. Nothing went wrong. She was aware of how low that bar was, and was aware that being aware of it was its own kind of progress. Lily's friendship with Sophie deepened in the accelerated manner of first-grade relationships, which seemed to operate on a timeline closer to geological epoch than human calendar. By January, they had inside jokes that Ava couldn't fully follow, and a shared fictional universe involving 2 horses named Crumpet and Detective, the details of which changed based on negotiation. Ava drove Lily to Sophie's house twice, and Sophie's mother drove Sophie to theirs once, and this exchange of custody was conducted between the 2 mothers with the polite, slightly careful friendliness of parents who had not yet decided if they were going to become friends themselves, but were leaving the option open. Sophie's mother's name was Renata, and she was a physical therapist with a very direct way of speaking that Ava found refreshing, and by the end of February they were meeting for coffee on alternate Saturdays while the girls occupied themselves with Crumpet and Detective's ongoing narrative. Ava noticed that she had, almost accidentally, acquired something approximating a social life. She didn't take it for granted. The thing about Ethan, the thing she was working very hard not to articulate to herself in any direct form, had a texture to it that was different from anything she'd allowed herself in a long time. It was not like what she'd had with Marcus Hale, which had been built on mutual recognition of ambition and the particular intoxication of someone who seemed to understand you, which she now understood had been designed to feel that way. It was not the sharp, clean, dangerous thing that complicated professional relationships usually were when they went sideways. It was slower than that, and more inconvenient. It arrived in small, specific moments. The way he asked her actual questions and waited for the actual answer rather than using the question as a vehicle for something else. The way he was honest about his own failures without making it into a performance of humility. The afternoon she'd arrived at the office to find he'd left a note on her desk saying a client had praised the meeting prep she'd handled and he'd wanted to make sure she knew about it directly. Not an email, a handwritten note on a post-it, because apparently he did that. Marcus had told her it was a thing he did, that he'd always done it. She kept the post-it. She was not proud of this. She was aware of it as a specific kind of information about herself that she was not prepared to act on, only to note. She was good at noting things. She'd been doing it for years. And the truth was that even if she hadn't been carrying all the complicated architecture of what had happened to her, even if she were a completely uncomplicated person with no particular history, there would still be the matter of the fact that he was her employer, that the power structure was what it was, that the line existed and was real, and she did not intend to be the one to step across it because she had spent too long rebuilding her own ground to put it at risk for anything. So she noted it. She filed it in the part of herself that was not currently open for decision-making. And she went to work and did her job well, and came home to her daughter and her apartment and her alternate Saturday coffees with Renata, and she built the life she was building, and she tried to do it without holding too much of it at arm's length. That was the work. Not the dramatic part, not the crisis and recovery arc that made for a good story with a clear turning point. The quiet daily work of being present in a life that was hers again. She was not at the end of it. She was somewhere in the middle, in the part where the ground was mostly solid, but you still watched where you put your feet. But she was standing, she was moving, and for now, for today, for this winter, for this slow, careful February, that was enough. March came in cold and stayed that way longer than anyone wanted. The kind of cold that wasn't dramatic. No blizzards, no ice storms, just a persistent gray that settled over everything and refused to lift. The trees on Dunmore Avenue stayed bare 2 weeks past when they should have started budding. Lily asked every morning if it was spring yet with the specific hopefulness of a child who had been promised a season and was beginning to suspect the promise was going to be broken. Soon, Ava told her, every morning. You said that yesterday. It's still true today. Lily accepted this with the long-suffering patience she deployed when adults were being inexact about timelines and went to school. At work, the first quarter push had everyone moving faster than usual. Walker Consulting had taken on 3 new clients in January, a regional healthcare network, a mid-sized logistics company going through a leadership transition, and a family-owned manufacturing business that was, depending on who you asked, either expanding responsibly or growing too fast. Ava was coordinating across all 3 simultaneously, which meant her days had a particular density that she found honestly more satisfying than she'd expected. She was good at density. She'd always been a person who functioned better with more to manage, who thought more clearly when the problems were complicated. Too much stillness, and her brain went looking for things to worry about. Too much to do, and she was paradoxically calmer. Dana had noticed this the same way Dana noticed most things, without commenting directly until she had something specific to say. The Hargrove transition timeline, Dana said one morning in late March, stopping at Ava's desk with a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other. You restructured it without being asked. The original wasn't accounting for the overlap between the leadership announcement and the staff communication window, Ava said. If they announce to the board before they've managed the staff rollout, they're going to have a leak problem. Dana looked at the revised version on her tablet. Ethan flagged the same thing this morning. I know. His note was in the project file from Tuesday. Ava paused. So I fixed it. How long did it take you? to fix it? 2 hours. How long did it take you to see it? Ava thought about it. About 4 minutes after I first read the original. Dana looked at her. Not an evaluating look, more like someone confirming something they already knew. The healthcare network account, she said. I want you to start attending the client calls. Ava blinked. That's Garrett's account. Garrett will still run the calls. I want you in them. She held up her hand before Ava could respond. This isn't a commentary on Garrett. It's a commentary on the fact that you have a skill set that is not being used at full capacity, and I don't like leaving capacity on the table. She set her coffee down. Does that work for you? Ava looked at her. Does Garrett know? He will. A beat. I'm asking if it works for you. Yes, Ava said. It works for me. Dana picked her coffee back up and walked away, which was its own form of punctuation. She told Renata about it on Saturday over coffee, while Sophie and Lily were in the next room negotiating what appeared to be a significant development in the Crumpet and Detective universe. She just decided that? Renata said. That's how Donna operates, Ava said. She decides things and then she tells you she's decided. She doesn't ask for input on the framework, just confirmation that you're on board. Do you like that? Ava thought about it honestly. I do, actually. There's something... I spent years running meetings where every decision was negotiated 5 times before anyone committed to it. Dana commits to things. She wrapped both hands around her mug. She's also right most of the time, which helps. And the Garrett situation? He wasn't happy about it. He was professional. Ava paused. He's better at being corrected than he was 6 months ago. I think the thing with Ethan in October rattled him in a useful direction. What about Ethan? Ava looked at her coffee. What about him? Renata had a therapist-adjacent quality to certain silences that Ava was both appreciating and finding mildly inconvenient. He doesn't know yet, Ava said. Dana didn't run it through him. She has the authority to make staffing decisions on the project teams. She paused. He'll find out in the next week when the team meetings happen. Are you nervous about that? No, Ava said. You're doing the thing where you answer too quickly. I'm not nervous about it in a professional sense, Ava corrected. The decision is Dana's, and it's defensible. Garrett will manage. I'm capable of the work. She looked at her coffee again. The other thing is separate. The other thing has a name, Renata said. The other thing is not relevant right now. Ava, he's my employer, she said. He'll always be my employer first, which means the rest of it. She stopped. There is no rest of it. There's a thing I'm aware of, and I'm choosing not to act on because it would complicate something I can't afford to complicate. She looked at Renata. That's not repression. That's pragmatism. Renata looked at her with the expression of someone who had something specific to say and was deciding whether the moment called for it. What? Ava said. Nothing. Renata. I was just thinking, Renata said carefully, that you're very good at protecting yourself, and that there's a version of protection that goes on long enough that it stops being protection and starts being, I know what it starts being, Ava said. I'm aware of the distinction. She set down her mug. I also know that the last time I trusted my instincts about a person, a man I believed was my partner professionally and personally, spent 18 months building a case against me that cost me everything I'd worked for. She looked at Renata directly. So I'm being careful, that's all. Renata held her gaze. He's not Marcus Hale. No, Ava said. But I didn't think Marcus Hale was Marcus Hale until it was too late. She paused. I'm allowed to take my time. You are, Renata said, and dropped it, with the grace of someone who knew when to let a subject rest. From the other room, there was the sound of a minor disagreement between Sophie and Lily about something that resolved itself in approximately 45 seconds, followed by a burst of laughter from both of them. Ava listened to it. She seems good, Renata said, nodding toward the sound. She is, Ava said, and meant it without qualification, which was itself a kind of milestone. The healthcare network client calls started the following Wednesday. Garrett ran them, efficiently, and with a deliberate professionalism toward Ava that was more formal than she'd have preferred, but was, she acknowledged, probably the best he could manage at this particular juncture. She contributed twice, specifically, in ways that moved the call forward, and both times Garrett paused and then incorporated what she'd said without resentment, which she credited him for. Ethan saw her name on the call summary in the weekly report. She was at her desk when he appeared in the doorway of the open workspace area, not with urgency, but with the particular focused calm that meant he was looking for something specific. "You were on the Meridian call," he said. "Dana put me on the account," she said. "She should have flagged it for you." "She did. The summary notes. The workflow issue you caught in the third agenda item. I'd been looking at that account for 2 weeks, and I missed it." Ava looked at him. "Garrett missed it too." "I know." He seemed to be weighing something. "Your background is organizational restructuring during transitions." "Yes." "Meridian is—" He stopped. "They told us it was a leadership transition. What it actually is a structural reorganization that they're trying to manage as if it were a leadership transition because the structural piece is politically messy and they're hoping we won't notice." He looked at her. "You noticed." "Wednesday morning," she said. "Third call." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you leading that account." She kept her face neutral. "That's Garrett's account. Garrett can stay on it in a supporting role. He knows the client history. But I want the strategic piece coming from you." He paused. "This isn't a snap decision. I talked to Dana this morning before coming down here." "What did she say?" "She said she'd been waiting for me to figure it out for 3 weeks." Something in Ava's chest moved, quiet and complicated. She looked at her desk for a moment, then back at him. "I want Garrett briefed by you, not by me. It needs to come from you." "Agreed. And I want the scope of my role in writing before the next client call." "Also agreed." He paused. "Is there anything else?" She thought about it. "No." "Then we're good." He left. She sat at her desk for 30 seconds and then went back to work, because there was a lot of work, and because sitting with the feeling that was trying to surface was not something she was prepared to do in the middle of a Wednesday at her desk. She was in the job she was supposed to be in. She'd rebuilt herself to the point where someone who had no obligation to see her clearly could see her clearly. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. She kept it in a quiet corner of herself and went back to work. Spring finally arrived in the second week of April, grudging and then all at once, the way it always was. Nothing and nothing. And then suddenly, everything green at the same time, like the world had been waiting for permission. Lily came home from school on a Thursday with a handful of clover flowers she'd picked from the schoolyard, a violation of the rules about picking plants on school grounds that Ava decided to treat as a sign of initiative rather than disobedience. They were going to get mowed, Lily said, with the specific logic of a 6-year-old defending a decision she knew was borderline. "I'm sure they were," Ava said. She put them in a glass on the kitchen windowsill. They lasted 2 days. She kept the glass on the windowsill after, because it had started to feel like something. Owen's 8th birthday party was in the 3rd week of April. Lily had been invited, which was how Ava came to spend 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon in a community rec center watching 12 children conduct the organized chaos of a birthday party while standing near the refreshment table with a cup of fruit punch. She wasn't particularly drinking. Ethan was there with his sister, a woman named Claire, who had his same quality of directness but delivered it with considerably more humor. Owen had the same wide-awake energy that Ava had come to recognize from the playground, moving through the room at a frequency that seemed specifically designed to cover as much ground as possible at all times. "He's a lot," Claire said to Ava, appearing at the refreshment table with the air of someone seeking a refuge. "I love him completely. He's a lot." "Lily thinks he's excellent," Ava said. "Lily has good taste." Claire looked at her. "She talks about your daughter, you know, Ethan. He says Lily is careful and thoughtful, and Owen needs more friends like that." She paused. "He's right, probably. Owen needs a counterweight." Ava didn't know what to do with the information that Ethan had been talking about Lily in a specific and considered way, so she filed it with everything else. How long have you known him? Claire asked. Since I know you work for him. I'm asking differently. About 7 months, Ava said. And? And he's a good employer. Claire gave her a look that was very much like Renata's look, the particular expression of someone who had been given an answer that was technically true and entirely insufficient. He worries, Claire said. He doesn't show it externally. He never has, even as a kid. But he thinks about people, specifically. He asks me about Owen's friends by name and remembers details about them from 3 months ago. She paused. He asks about you. Ava looked at her. About work things. Sometimes, Claire said. Not always. Across the room, Ethan was helping Owen manage a complicated moment with the birthday cake candles. Some issue with the number of them being distributed inequitably across the surface, a grievance Owen was articulating at some volume. Ethan listened with full attention, rearranged 3 candles, checked Owen's assessment of the revised arrangement, and when Owen approved, lit them with a lighter he produced from his pocket with the practiced efficiency of a man who had navigated a lot of birthday logistics. He looked up once, across the room, and met Ava's eyes. He nodded slightly, the way you nodded at someone you knew when the room was loud and conversation wasn't available. She nodded back. Claire watched this exchange with a subtlety that was less subtle than she probably intended. Ava turned back to her fruit punch and said nothing. The week everything changed began on an ordinary Monday. Ava was at her desk by 8, as usual, working through the Meridian account preparation for a Thursday call that was going to be complicated. They'd found the structural issue, she and Ethan together in a working session the previous week, and Thursday was going to be the meeting where they presented it to the client, which was the meeting where clients either appreciated having the problem named or became defensive about having it exposed. She'd run this kind of meeting before. She knew how to read the room going in and adjust as it developed. Her phone rang at 8:23 in the morning. She didn't recognize the number, but she recognized the area code. The same area code as Lily's school. Ms. Sterling, this is Principal Okafor at Millbrook Elementary. I need you to come to the school. Lily fell on the playground this morning during early drop-off. She's... A brief pause that was professional but contained something else in it. She's conscious and she's with the nurse, but she hit her head on the edge of the climbing structure and I think she needs to be seen by a doctor. The 45-minute sequence that followed had the quality of certain nightmares. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind built entirely of small moments of wrongness accumulating. Lily was at the nurse's station when Ava arrived, sitting with her knees pulled up, her face the particular gray-white of a child whose body was doing something that alarmed it. The nurse said the word concussion with careful professional non-commitment. She said there had been vomiting. She said Lily had been asking for her mother. Ava sat next to Lily and took both her hands and said quietly, I'm here. I've got you. Lily didn't say anything. She just leaned her head carefully against Ava's shoulder, and the particular weight of that, the trust in it, the smallness of her, went through Ava like current. The emergency room at Millbrook Community was not a disaster. The doctor was young and methodical and clear in her communication. The scan was precautionary. The diagnosis was a mild concussion, the word mild doing significant emotional labor in that sentence. And the instructions were rest, observation, no screens, follow up in 2 days. They were there for 4 hours. Ava had texted Dana from the school. Family emergency, I'll keep you updated. She'd gotten back. Take what you need, call if there's anything. She hadn't texted Ethan. There was no particular reason to text Ethan. He wasn't... Her phone buzzed at noon. Ethan. Dana told me, is Lily okay? She looked at the message for a moment. Ava, mild concussion. She's okay. We're at the hospital now. Ethan, do you need anything? She started to type no and stopped. The honest answer was that she had $37 in her checking account until the end of the week, that the hospital copay was going to be $220 because she'd hit her deductible in February, and the math had never quite recovered, that she had no family in this state, that Renata was working today and couldn't leave, and that she was sitting in a hospital waiting room with her daughter sleeping against her shoulder, and she was holding everything together by the specific force of will she'd been running on for over a year, and she was very, very tired. She typed, "I'm okay. Thank you for asking." She sent it. Then she put the phone in her bag and looked at her daughter's sleeping face, the bruised exhaustion of it, the small, dry lips, the way her eyelashes rested against her cheek. And she pressed one hand carefully against Lily's hair, and she let herself sit there in the particular terror and relief of a parent whose child was going to be fine, but who had spent 4 hours not knowing that. She did not cry. She had cried later in the months since when the memory surfaced at odd moments. But in the hospital, she kept herself level, because Lily needed her level, and that was the job, and she was going to do the job. Chesim. She got Lily home at 2 in the afternoon, set her up on the couch with a blanket and the specific small stuffed elephant named Gerald. Yes, same name as the building manager, which had been coincidence and was now a source of quiet amusement every time Ava saw the actual Gerald in the hallway. And Lily slept, and Ava sat in the chair beside the couch and watched her sleep and did the math she'd been avoiding. The copay, the follow-up appointment, the days she'd need to be home, at minimum 2, possibly 3, and what that would mean for the Meridian call. The fact that she'd been planning to ask Dana about a salary review next month and now felt like she couldn't, because the timing would look wrong, would look like she was connecting the dots between the crisis and the ask. She was calculating the old way, the way she'd been calculating for over a year, the familiar architecture of not quite enough. The doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Ethan Walker standing in her hallway with a paper bag from the deli 3 blocks from the office, and an expression that was specifically careful, the face of a person who was prepared to be told to leave and was going to accept that without argument. She stared at him. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, and then, before she could respond, "That's a lie. I drove here." He held up the bag. "I didn't know if you'd eaten. I took a guess and got soup." She stood in the doorway and looked at him, and felt something give way in her chest with a small, distinct, exhausting release. "Come in," she said. He came in quietly, taking in the apartment with the brief, non-invasive glance of someone cataloging without commenting. He set the bag on the kitchen counter and unpacked it with the same straightforward efficiency he brought to most things. 2 containers of soup, bread, a bottle of juice, a small container of something that turned out to be the chocolate chip cookies from the deli that Ava happened to know cost $4 each and were worth every cent. "How is she?" he asked, looking toward the living room where Lily was sleeping. "Sleeping. She's been down for about an hour." Ava leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not defensively, but because she needed the support. "The doctor said the next 24 hours are just rest and observation. No fever, no increased symptoms, she should be fine." "Good." He looked at the soup containers. "Eat something. You look like you've been awake since before this morning." "I've been awake since before this morning," she said. "I couldn't sleep last night. Some work thing I was turning over." She pushed off the counter and opened a drawer for spoons. "I don't need—" "I know you don't need it," he said. "I brought it anyway. That's allowed." She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady and unmoving. "Okay," she said. They sat at her kitchen table, the small one with the slightly uneven leg that she'd shimmed with a folded piece of cardboard, and ate the soup, which was chicken and rice and better than anything she would have made for herself under these circumstances. "The Meridian call," she said. "Don't. I need to think about coverage. Dana already moved it to the following Tuesday," he said. "It's handled. Don't." She looked at her soup. "I was going to be the one to reschedule it." "You were busy keeping your kid from being scared in a hospital." She didn't say anything. "Ava." His voice was level. "The call has been moved. Your job is not in any danger. We will manage for a few days without you, imperfectly, but adequately." He paused. "All you need to do right now is be here." She looked up at him. There was something happening in her throat that she was managing with some effort. "The copay," she said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out the way things came out when you were exhausted past the point of managing yourself. "The hospital thing. It's fine. I have the money. It's just going to be tight this week, and She stopped. "Never mind. I don't know why I said that." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you need," he said. Not performing. Not with the particular charged weight of someone who wanted to be seen being generous. Just asking. I don't need anything, she said. Ava? I really don't. I can handle it. She looked at the table. The cardboard shim was visible under the leg, slightly too thick on one side. She'd been meaning to adjust it for weeks. I just said it because I'm tired and I'm not guarding everything carefully right now. You don't have to guard everything carefully right now. I do, she said. I always, not in my kitchen, he said. Not with me. He stopped. There was something careful happening in his voice, the way a person carefully stepped when they knew the ground was uncertain. I know you don't trust that. I know you have specific and well-earned reasons for not trusting it. I'm not asking you to forget those reasons. I'm asking you to... He paused, seemed to make a decision. Let me pay the copay. She looked at him. It's not charity, he said. It's not a loan. It's just, I have it, and you need it, and you're a person He stopped again. You're someone I care about, and that means this is something I'd like to do. The silence in the apartment was the kind you could hear. The refrigerator hum, Lily's soft breathing from the other room, traffic somewhere below. You care about me, she said. The words were flat, testing. Yes. Not as an employee. He met her eyes. Not only as an employee. She looked at him for a long time. She was doing what she always did, looking for the angle, the cost, the thing behind the thing. She found, as she had been gradually finding for months, with an accumulation of small evidence she'd been refusing to let herself add up. Nothing. Not nothing in the sense of absence of substance, nothing in the sense of no hidden architecture, no mechanism. Just a man sitting at her kitchen table who had driven to her apartment on his lunch break because her kid was sick and he thought she might not have eaten. You can't say things like that, she said. You're my employer. I know, he said. I know exactly what line that puts me on, and I'm not going to push past it. I wouldn't. That's not what I'm doing. He looked at her steadily. I'm just not going to pretend I don't. He stopped, seemed to decide the sentence was going somewhere that the moment didn't call for. I wanted to make sure you were okay, that's all. That's not all, and we both know it, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. He didn't answer that. He just looked at her in the specific way of someone who had said what they could say and was waiting. From the other room, Mama? Lily's voice, small and sleep-roughened. Ava was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move. Lily was sitting up on the couch with Gerald the elephant in her lap, blinking with the slow confusion of a child waking from a deep and wrong-timed sleep. Her color was better than it had been at the hospital, which Ava clocked immediately and felt the relief of. Hey, Bug, Ava said, sitting next to her. How do you feel? Tired, Lily said. She looked past Ava at the kitchen doorway where Ethan had appeared, quietly, staying back. Is that Owen's dad? Yes, Ava said. Lily considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old making an assessment. Why is he here? He brought us soup. Oh. Lily looked at Ethan. Did you bring cookies? I did, Ethan said. Lily looked at her mother. Can I have one? When you've had some soup, Ava said. Lily accepted this, tucked Gerald more securely under her arm, and leaned against her mother's shoulder. After a moment, in a quieter voice, My head still hurts. I know, Ava said. It's going to for a little while. That's normal. She pressed her lips to the top of Lily's hair, careful of the bruise. I've got you. Lily made a small sound of acceptance and stayed where she was. Over Lily's head, Ava met Ethan's eyes across the room. Something in that look, the specific quality of it, two people in an ordinary apartment on a difficult afternoon, both of them imperfect and tired and still standing, landed in Ava in a place she hadn't let anyone reach in a very long time. She looked away first. But she didn't look away because she was afraid. She looked away because she wasn't, and that was the more alarming thing. He left an hour later, after Lily had eaten half a container of soup and 1.5 cookies and fallen back asleep looking considerably more like herself. He wrote a check for the copay amount, set it on the kitchen counter, and didn't say anything about it. She didn't argue. She would have argued 4 months ago. She would have argued 2 months ago. She was aware of what it meant that she didn't argue now. At the door, he paused. "Dana has my cell if anything changes," he said. "You don't have to call me directly, but you can." "Okay," she said. He nodded, opened the door, then, "Ava." She looked at him. "You've been doing this alone for a long time," he said. "I know you're good at it. I'm not questioning that." He held her gaze. "I just want you to know that you don't have to be." He left. She stood in the doorway for a moment, door open, hallway empty. The particular smell of the third-floor hallway that she'd stopped noticing months ago suddenly present again. Someone's cooking, the carpet, the building's specific breath. She closed the door. She went back to the couch and sat beside Lily and put her hand on her daughter's back and felt it rise and fall. Outside, March had finally fully become April. The window was cracked open and the evening air coming through it had something different in it, the first real softness of the year, the thing that had been promised and delayed and was now finally here. Lily breathed in and out. Ava sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt, with slow, reluctant, genuine certainty, the thing she'd been filing away for months taking shape in a part of her she'd considered closed. She wasn't ready for it. She wasn't sure she'd know how to be ready for it, but it was there. It had been there for a while. She'd just needed a kitchen table and a check on the counter, and a man who said you don't have to be, and then left without waiting for an answer, to finally let herself know it. The follow-up appointment confirmed what the first doctor had said. Mild concussion, resolving normally, no complications. Lily was cleared for school after 4 days and declared herself fully recovered by day 3, a diagnosis her body disagreed with but her personality had already committed to. Ava took 5 days off total. She spent them in the apartment with Lily, doing the things the doctor had specified: quiet activities, limited stimulation, regular check-ins on symptoms, and also doing things the doctor hadn't specified but that felt necessary anyway. They played cards. They did a puzzle that was missing 4 pieces and completed it anyway, leaving the gaps as what Lily called air windows. They watched 2 movies with the volume low, which was allowed, and talked about the plots afterward in the way Lily liked to talk about stories, picking apart the characters' decisions with a scrutiny that Ava found both impressive and occasionally exhausting. On the 3rd day, Lily said, "Is Ethan your friend?" Ava was in the kitchen making tea. She kept her hands on what they were doing. "He's my employer." "That's not the same as a friend." "No, it's not." "But he brought us soup," Lily said. "Friends bring soup." "People who aren't friends also bring soup sometimes," Ava said. "It's not exclusive to one category." Lily considered this. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book open in front of her, working on a page with a deliberate and unsystematic approach, to which colors went where that Ava had learned not to comment on. "Owen says his dad talks about us." Ava brought her tea to the table and sat down. "Owen told you that?" "At school, before I fell." Lily selected a purple crayon with the confidence of someone who had already decided. "He said his dad says Lily is careful and I like her. Owen thinks that's funny because he says his dad doesn't usually notice stuff about people his own age." "His dad's age," Ava corrected. "That's what I said." Lily applied the purple to what appeared to be a tree trunk. "I like Owen. He's loud, but he's nice loud, not mean loud." "That's a good distinction. Do you like Ethan?" Ava wrapped her hands around her mug. "Yes? As a friend?" "Lily, I'm just asking." "I know you are." Ava looked at her daughter, who was watching her now with those intermittently old eyes, the ones that appeared in the middle of her ordinary 6-year-old face, and saw more than Ava consistently remembered to account for. "It's complicated." "Because he's your boss?" "Partly." Lily seemed to turn this over. Then, returning to the coloring book, "Sophie's mom and dad were friends first, and then they got married. Sophie says they met at a work thing." "Lily?" "I'm coloring," Lily said innocently. "I'm not saying anything." Ava looked at the ceiling briefly. "You're saying something." "I'm coloring, and you're making inferences," Lily said, which was a word she'd gotten from Ava and had been deploying with increasing accuracy. Ava almost spilled her tea from the surprise of laughing. She went back to work on a Monday morning, and the office received her the way offices received people returning from brief family crises, with a collective normalcy that was itself a form of care, everyone behaving as though she'd simply been away for a few days, which she had, because that was the thing that had happened and the thing that didn't require commentary. Marcus said, "The Meridian call is Tuesday. You're running it." "I know," she said. "I've read the prep material." "When?" "This weekend." He looked at her. "You were supposed to be resting." Lily was resting. I was reading. He shook his head in a way that was more affectionate than exasperated, and they moved on. Ethan was on the 5th floor when she arrived. He came down mid-morning on his usual trajectory between floors and stopped at her desk, which he didn't always do. "How is she?" he asked. "Back at school today, extremely confident she's fine." Ava paused. She asked Sophie to save her seat in line the entire time she was out, and apparently Sophie did, which Lily is treating as the highest form of loyalty. Something in his face shifted. Not a full smile, but the precursor to one, the thing before the thing. "Good," he said. "That's good." "The check," she said. She'd been deciding how to address this since the afternoon he left it on her counter. "I'm going to pay you back." He started to say something. "I'm going to pay you back," she said again, steadier. "Not immediately. I'll work out a timeline, but I need to do that." He looked at her for a moment. She could see him weighing whether to argue and deciding not to. "Okay," he said. "Thank you," she said. "For—" She stopped. "All of it." He held her gaze. "You would have managed without it." "I know," she said. "That's not the point." "What's the point?" She thought about how to say it accurately. "The point is that you didn't make me ask, and you didn't make it cost me anything." She paused. "I haven't had a lot of that." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said, and moved on. The Meridian call on Tuesday went the way she'd known it would go, which was not without difficulty. The client, a man named Brennan, who ran the healthcare network with the specific confidence of someone who had been told he was decisive for so long he'd stopped questioning whether his decisions were good, pushed back hard on the structural diagnosis. He used the word characterization 3 times in a way that made it clear he thought she was wrong, or was hoping she could be talked into believing she was wrong, which was not the same thing, but sometimes worked on people. She let him push. She didn't move. "Mr. Brennan," she said, in the particular voice she'd developed for this kind of moment. Not cold, not combative, just very precise. "I understand that this characterization is different from what you engaged us for. But what we engaged for and what the situation actually is are not always the same thing, and my job, the job you're paying for, is to tell you what the situation actually is." She paused. "You have a structural problem dressed as a leadership problem. Treating it as a leadership problem will cost you 18 months and most of the goodwill you have with your mid-level staff. Treating it as the structural problem it is will cost you approximately 6 months and a harder conversation with your board." She let that sit for a moment. "I can help you with the harder conversation." Silence on the call. Then Garrett, who had been quiet for most of it, said, "Mr. Brennan, I've been working with Walker Consulting for 3 years, and I've seen this distinction matter significantly in outcomes. Ms. Sterling's read is consistent with what I've been observing and wasn't sure how to frame." Another silence. Then Brennan said with the specific heaviness of a man revising his position, "Send me the structural analysis in writing before Friday." "You'll have it Wednesday," Ava said. Call ended. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. From across the workspace, Garrett said, without looking up from his computer, "Good call." She looked at him. "The Brennan thing," he said. "You handled it well." He still wasn't looking at her. "For what it's worth." She understood that this was costing him something, and she received it accordingly. "Thank you, Garrett." He nodded. They both went back to work. Later, she would think about that small exchange as one of the specific moments of the year that mattered. Not the dramatic ones, but the ordinary acts of professional decency conducted between people who had navigated friction and arrived somewhere workable. Those moments were, in her experience, harder to achieve than they looked. May brought a rhythm that she hadn't had in so long that she'd forgotten it was possible. She woke at 6:15, made coffee, got Lily through the morning, which involved negotiation over breakfast, the daily assessment of what was clean and appropriate to wear, the losing battle against Lily's opinion about her own hair, drove her to school, and arrived at the office by 8:15 with the specific settled quality of a person whose life had a shape. She had a life with a shape. She was aware of it the way you were aware of recovered hearing, not constantly, but in moments when the ordinary sound of things struck her as remarkable. She and Renata had moved from alternate Saturdays to most Saturdays, and had also added a standing Thursday evening arrangement where Ava brought wine and Renata made food, and they sat in Renata's kitchen and talked about their weeks with the candor that developed between people who had decided to actually know each other. It was the first real friendship Ava had built since losing everything, and she was careful with it in the way she was careful with everything, but she was also in it, fully, which was different from the careful from a distance that had been her default mode for so long. At work, the Meridian structural analysis was delivered Wednesday as promised, received with more receptivity than the call had suggested was likely, and moved into an active engagement that tripled the original project scope. Dana presented the revenue number at the next all-hands meeting with characteristic understatement. Garrett acknowledged Ava's contribution publicly and without evident pain, which Ava recognized as a significant evolution from October. She was building something again, slowly, incrementally, in a way she had more control over than before. Not the same thing she'd lost. She'd let go of that version, finally, in the apartment one evening in late April with Lily asleep and the window open, just let it go the way you eventually put down something you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped being able to feel how heavy it was. That thing was gone. She wasn't rebuilding it. She was building something else, something that had her name on it in a different way, and that difference felt increasingly like enough. The question of Ethan existed separately from all of this, and alongside all of it simultaneously, which was the particular inconvenience of real feelings as opposed to convenient ones. She'd been honest with herself about it since the afternoon in her apartment, but honesty with herself and willingness to act were different categories, and she was still in the first one. She watched the line between them carefully. She didn't step over it. Neither did he. But the line had become a different kind of thing than it had been when she started. It was Claire who broke the equilibrium, which Ava later thought was probably inevitable. She ran into her at the farmer's market on the first Saturday in May. Lily was at a birthday party, which left Ava with 2 free hours and the rare and slightly disorienting luxury of an errand conducted alone. Claire was at the vegetable stand with Owen, who was conducting an unsolicited and detailed assessment of every variety of tomato available to a woman behind the table, who appeared to be tolerating it with considerable grace. "Owen," Claire said, "she doesn't need to know that you prefer the ones that are more round." "But I do prefer them," Owen said. "The lady knows what she's selling. Let's move on." Owen selected his tomatoes, specifically round ones, and they moved on, which brought Claire directly into Ava's path. "Ava," Claire looked genuinely pleased. "Owen, go look at the strawberries. Stay where I can see you." Owen went. "He does that at every single stand," Claire said. "Everyone. He has opinions about everything. I don't know where he gets it." "He gets it from his father," Ava said. Claire laughed. "Yes, absolutely, yes. And Ethan somehow doesn't see it." She fell into step beside Ava in the particular way of two people who were going the same direction and had decided to do so together. "How's Lily? I heard about the concussion." "She's recovered. She's at a party right now, which I think is the definitive proof of full recovery." "Thank God for parties." Claire looked at her peripherally. "Ethan drove to your apartment," she said. "I know. I was there." "He doesn't do that. I want you to understand that. He helps people. He's always been like that. Since we were kids, he was the one who noticed things and did something about them. But he doesn't drive to people's apartments." She paused. "He called me that evening. He does that sometimes when something is on his mind." Ava looked at a display of cut flowers without seeing them. He didn't tell me everything, Claire continued. He's not that kind of person, but I know my brother, and I know the specific quality of his voice when something matters to him, and she stopped. I'm not trying to push anything. I genuinely am not. I just thought you should know, from someone who has known him for 32 years, that what you've probably been trying to decide is actually straightforward. Ava was quiet for a moment. It's not straightforward, she said. He's my employer. He's a person first, Claire said. The employer thing is circumstantial. It's not circumstantial, it's structural. I know you've had reasons to take structural things seriously, Claire said. The words were careful and not unkind. I'm not dismissing that, but Ethan is specifically not. She seemed to choose the next word deliberately. He is specifically not someone who uses what he has over someone who has less. That is the exact opposite of what he is. She looked at Ava. I think you know that. I think you've known it for a while, and the knowing is what's making it complicated. Ava looked at the flowers. He won't say anything to you, Claire said. He's made a rule for himself about it, and he'll keep the rule indefinitely because he thinks it's the right thing to do. Which it is, probably. But it means, she paused, it means if something is going to shift, it probably has to come from you. Ava looked at her. You're telling me this on behalf of, I'm telling you this on behalf of myself, Claire said firmly. He would actually kill me if he knew we were having this conversation. I mean that almost literally. She looked at Owen, who had moved on from strawberries to a display of herbs and was conducting a similar assessment. I'm telling you because you seem like someone who has been waiting for permission to trust something for a long time, and sometimes people need to hear from the outside that the thing is actually trustworthy. She met Ava's eyes. For what it's worth. From someone who has no stake in the outcome. Ava looked at her for a moment. He would actually kill you, she said. Probably, Claire agreed. Don't tell him. Owen reappeared with a handful of basil he'd been given by a vendor and an expression of deep satisfaction. Aunt Claire, this smells like pizza. It does, Claire said. Put it in the bag. They went their separate ways at the corner, and Ava walked to her car alone through the Saturday morning market, with the noise of it all around her and the sun doing what it was finally, fully doing in May. And she thought about what Claire had said. Waiting for permission to trust something. She'd been waiting. She'd been waiting, and she'd been calling it prudence. And sometimes it was prudence, and sometimes it was something that looked like prudence from the outside and was, at its root, just fear. She sat in her car with her hands on the wheel and the engine not yet started. She was afraid. That was the honest thing, not of him specifically. She'd been watching him specifically for months, and he had not given her a concrete reason to be afraid of him. She was afraid of the thing itself, of the exposure, of being in a position, again, where another person had access to the interior of her and could use it. Marcus Hale had used it. The difference, she kept returning to, was that Marcus Hale had sought that access strategically, from the beginning, with a specific intention. She knew that now in a way she hadn't known it then. He had asked questions to collect leverage, not to understand. He had remembered details to use them, not because he cared about them. She'd been turning over Ethan's moments for months, looking for the mechanism, looking for the strategic collection. She had not found it. What she'd found instead were the things she'd been trying not to count. The Post-it on her desk, the check on her counter, the soup he drove across town to bring, the look across the party room when Owen fixed the candles, 100 small specific things that were not the same as proof, but were, cumulatively, their own kind of evidence. She started the car. She drove home. She did not do anything about it that day, but she stopped pretending she hadn't decided. The thing she hadn't anticipated, the thing nobody told you when you were in the process of slowly, incrementally deciding to trust someone, was how uncomfortable it was. Not in a bad way. In the way that any real change was uncomfortable, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time suddenly being asked to work again. She was pricklier with him for a week after that. She noticed it and couldn't entirely stop it. Small moments where she responded with more formality than the situation required, where she held the professional line more firmly than necessary, where she went out of her way to make the employer-employee structure visible in ways she usually didn't bother with. He noticed. She could see him notice, and she could see him deciding not to comment on it, which she appreciated and which also, perversely, made things worse. On a Thursday afternoon, after a meeting that had gone well but left her irritable for reasons she couldn't entirely account for, she passed him in the hallway and said, "I'm being weird, and I know I'm being weird." He stopped. "You're being a little formal." "I know." "You don't have to tell me why." "I know." She looked at him. "I'm working through something." He nodded. No performance of patience, no angling for information, just nodded and said, "Okay." "Okay," she said. They went their respective directions. That evening, she called Renata and told her what Claire had said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I told you the same thing 3 months ago," Renata said. "You were more diplomatic about it." "That was my mistake," Renata said. I should have been less diplomatic." "Renata, I'm not saying do anything tonight. I'm saying you already know what you want, and you've known it for months, and the only thing standing between you and it is you." A pause. "Which is your right. You're allowed to take your time. Another pause. "I like you happy. I've seen you less afraid lately. I want that to continue." Ava sat on her couch in the evening quiet of her apartment, Lily asleep, the window cracked, the May air carrying the warm, particular smell of the neighborhood at night, and said, "What if I trust it, and it goes wrong?" "Then it goes wrong," Renata said, "and you deal with it, the same way you've dealt with everything." "That's not a comfort." "No," Renata said, "but it's true." What actually happened was small. It was always small, she'd found. The things that shifted the big architecture were almost always small at the point of contact. It was a Friday evening in the third week of May. The office had emptied out by 5:30, with the particular energy of a Friday before a warm weekend. She'd stayed late, not late, just later than most, finishing the Meridian written deliverable that was going out Monday morning and wanted to be done before the weekend so it could sit in her mind as finished rather than pending. She heard him on the stairs at 6. She didn't look up. He came through the door to the fourth-floor workspace and stopped when he saw the light. "You're still here." "Finishing the Meridian write-up." "It doesn't need to go until Monday." "I know, I want it done." He came into the room, not to her desk. He sat on the edge of the desk he'd sat on before in October, when they talked after the Garrett stairwell incident. There was something familiar in that, she thought. The same desk. "You've been here almost a year," he said. "June 8th, she said. 11 months. How does it feel?" She considered the honest answer. "Like I'm somewhere real," she said. "Like I'm doing work that means something. Like—" She stopped. "Like I did it right. The decision to come here. Even with everything." She looked at the screen in front of her. "I was angry for a long time that I had to start over. I'm less angry about it now." "What changed?" "The starting over worked," she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you something," she said. "Not just the money, though I haven't forgotten the money." She turned her chair slightly toward him. "You didn't make me feel like a charity case. You didn't make me feel like I owed you something in a different way. You just—" She stopped. "You just did what you said, the contract, the salary, the clear expectations, no special treatment, no strings." She looked at him. "I didn't think that was possible. I thought I was being naive for even considering it." "You weren't naive," he said. "I was afraid I was." "That's different." She looked at him. He was looking at her with that specific steadiness that had, she realized, been one of the first things she'd trusted. Before she'd consciously trusted anything, before she'd admitted to herself that she was building something resembling trust, she'd trusted that look, the quality of it, the way it didn't move. "Claire told me," she said, "that if something was going to shift, it would have to come from me." Something in his expression changed. "She also told me you'd kill her for saying it," Ava said. A long pause. "She's not wrong about that." "She's not wrong about the other part either." Ava looked at her hands for a moment and then looked back at him. "I've been watching you for almost a year, looking for the thing behind the thing, the mechanism." She paused. "I haven't found it." "There isn't one," he said. His voice was quiet. "I know," she said. I know that now. And I need you to understand how long it took me to get to knowing that, and that the time it took wasn't about you specifically. It was about what I'd been through and what I learned from it. I know, he said. I've never pushed. You haven't. She looked at him. That was also evidence. He was very still. I like you, she said. It came out direct and unadorned, the way she said things when she decided to say them. Not as my employer. Not just as someone who was kind to me when I needed it. I like you as a person. Specifically. I have for a while. She paused. And I'm not entirely sure what to do with that, given everything, but I thought I should stop not saying it. The room was quiet. I should probably note, he said carefully, that this is one of those situations where I have thought extensively about what I'd want to say, and am now finding all of it inadequate. You don't have to say anything eloquent. I'm not going to. He looked at her steadily. I've been careful. With the line. With the structure of everything. Because I think you deserve that. You deserve someone who would sit on their side of the line and wait until you were ready, if you were ever ready, instead of making you navigate something you hadn't chosen. He paused. And I want to keep being careful. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I don't want to be something that complicates your life. You already complicate my life, she said. You have been for months. I've just been handling the complication internally. He almost smiled. Fair. I'm not asking for anything specific right now, she said. She stopped. I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. That's all. I wanted you to know. He held her gaze. I've been waiting, he said simply. For a while. She looked at him. I know, she said. They sat in the quiet of the empty office, the two of them, with the weight of almost a year of careful distance between them and the distance now acknowledged for what it was. Not absence, but patience. Not emptiness, but space deliberately held. Outside, Millbrook was doing its Friday evening thing, people moving through the streets, restaurants filling, the ordinary sound of a city transitioning from work to something else. The light through the office windows was the long golden light of May evenings that lingered past when you expected it to be gone. I need to finish this write-up, she said. I know, he said, and we need to think about the structure, he said. Yes, I've been thinking about it for a while. There are options. He paused. Dana has been offering to take over as the formal point of oversight for your work, which would change the reporting line. I haven't said anything to her because I didn't want to. He stopped. I didn't want to presume. Talk to Dana, Ava said. Okay. After the weekend. After the weekend. He stood up from the edge of the desk. Finish the write-up. Go home to Lily. I will. He moved toward the stairs and then stopped. He turned around. Ava. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, for saying it. She held his gaze. Thank you for waiting. He went up the stairs. She heard his footsteps on the landing and then the upper floor, and she turned back to her screen and the Meridian write-up, and her hands were not entirely steady on the keyboard for the first 20 minutes, which she allowed because it was Friday and the office was empty and nobody was watching, and she figured she was entitled to a little unsteady. She finished the write-up at 7:15. It was good. She knew it was good in the plain way she knew her own work. She saved it, shut down her computer, gathered her things, and took the elevator down, working tonight, just her luck, and walked out into the May evening with her jacket over her arm and the warm air against her face and the long light still going. She thought about what Renata had said. I want that to continue. She thought about the notebook. The 3 things, every night. The evidence she'd been collecting against the argument that nothing was improving. She'd need to write something tonight. She already knew what it was going to be. Not triumphant, not cinematic, just true. She got in her car and drove home to her daughter. The conversation with Dana happened on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the Friday evening in the empty office. Ava knew it had happened because Dana appeared at her desk at 10:15 with a coffee she hadn't been asked to bring and set it down with the specific deliberateness of someone who was about to say something they'd already fully decided. Ethan talked to me, Dana said. Ava looked up. I know. I'm taking over as your direct supervisor, effective the 1st of June. Your reporting line changes, your compensation doesn't, your scope doesn't. She paused. None of this affects how I see your work or your position here. You know that. I do, Ava said. Dana looked at her for a moment, not evaluating, more like the look of someone who had watched a complicated situation resolve in a reasonable direction and was quietly satisfied by it. For what it's worth, she said, I've worked with Ethan for 4 years. I've seen him manage a lot of things. She picked up her own coffee. I've never seen him rearrange his organizational structure before. She walked away before Ava could respond, which was Dana's way, and also the exact right thing to do in that moment. Ava sat at her desk and looked at the coffee Dana had brought her. Then she picked it up and went back to work. What followed was not a romantic comedy. She wanted to be clear about that, at least in her own accounting of it. There was no sudden transformation, no scene where everything became easy because 2 people had admitted something true. What there was instead was the ordinary, slightly awkward business of 2 people who had been carefully maintaining a specific distance and were now adjusting to the new geography. The first time he asked her to dinner, not a work dinner, a specific and stated not work dinner, he did it badly. He was standing in the 4th floor kitchen, again, which seemed to be their room for significant conversations, and he said, I was thinking Friday, dinner, if you want, and then looked at her with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this and found that rehearsal had not helped. She looked at him. That's not a question. I know, I was trying to make it sound more casual than it felt. He paused. Do you want to have dinner with me on Friday? That's the question. Yes, she said. Okay. Okay. They both went back to what they were doing. She told Renata that evening, and Renata said, How did he ask? Badly, Ava said. It was actually reassuring. Reassuring how? Because if he'd been smooth about it, I'd have been suspicious. She paused. He was awkward. He said, if you want, and then looked like he regretted the phrasing. Renata laughed. A full, genuine one. That man, she said. I know, Ava said. She was smiling. She noticed the smiling the way she noticed all the things she'd gotten out of the habit of the absence first, then the return, then the gradual normalization, until it stopped feeling remarkable and just felt like her face doing what faces did. None. Dinner was at a restaurant on the east side of town that was not the Millbrook River restaurant, which she appreciated without saying so. It was quieter, a little more serious in the way it took its food, and they talked for 3 hours in the way 2 people talked when they'd been talking around something for a year and were finally allowed to talk about it directly. She learned things she hadn't known, that he'd had a partnership in his late 20s with a college friend that had ended badly. Not betrayal, just incompatibility, the slow grinding kind that was almost harder because there was no single moment to point to. That Owen's mother had been someone he'd cared about genuinely and parted from without bitterness. 2 people who had been right about loving each other and wrong about being able to build a life together in the same place. That he'd started the company because after the partnership dissolved, he'd needed something that was entirely his, with no shared ownership of the vision, which had been lonely at first and then, gradually, the best decision he'd ever made. She told him things too. Not everything. She wasn't built for everything all at once, and she was old enough to know that about herself. But she told him about the company she'd built. The real version, the 8 years of it, the specific things she'd been proudest of, and the specific ways she'd failed. She told him about the night she'd understood what Marcus Hale had done, which had been a Thursday in September, sitting in her office at 10 p.m., reading an email she wasn't supposed to see, and the specific quality of that understanding. Not a collapse, just a door closing. I thought the hardest part would be losing the company, she said. It wasn't. What was? Deciding what it meant about me, she said. For a long time I thought it meant I was someone who could be fooled, who had bad judgment, who... She stopped. Who didn't deserve what she'd built somehow, because if she had, she would have kept it. She looked at her wine glass. It took me a long time to separate what he did from what I was. Are you separated from it now? She thought about it honestly. Mostly, she said, I still have the instinct, the looking for the mechanism. She met his eyes. I still looked for it with you. I'm telling you that plainly. I know you did, he said. Did it bother you? He considered this. No, he said. I understood why. He paused. I wanted to be what I actually was, not what you were afraid I might be. The only way to do that was to just be it, consistently. He shrugged one shoulder. It wasn't a strategy. It was just the only option that made sense. She looked at him. That's either very simple or very sophisticated. Mostly, it's just what I know how to do, he said. I'm not complicated in the ways people expect. What ways are you complicated? He thought about it. I hold things too long before I say them, he said. I already told you I handled Garrett wrong. I make decisions faster than I communicate them, which causes problems. I work too much, and Owen tells me this regularly with the specificity of someone keeping a tally. He paused. I'm not easy to be close to, probably. I'm better at the long game than the daily thing. What's the daily thing? Remembering to say out loud what I'm thinking, he said. I assume people know. They usually don't. She filed this as the most useful thing he'd told her yet. Not because it was alarming, it wasn't particularly, but because it was accurate self-knowledge offered without defensiveness. And accurate self-knowledge offered without defensiveness was rarer than it should have been, and she valued it when she found it. I don't let people in easily, she said. You know that. I know. And I'm slow to admit when I'm struggling. I'll manage a crisis internally until it's past the point where asking for help would have been reasonable, and then I'll be annoyed with myself for not asking. She paused. Lily calls it my I'm fine face. Apparently I have one. What does it look like? According to Lily, it looks like my normal face, but tighter around the eyes. She almost smiled. She's 6 and she can read me better than most adults. She's sharp, he said. She got it from somewhere, Ava said, and then looked slightly startled by her own response, as though she hadn't expected to make that particular move in this particular conversation. He noticed. The corner of his mouth moved. Stop, she said. I'm not doing anything. You're doing the almost smile thing. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, with the specific face of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. She shook her head, and felt somewhere in the middle of that small exchange something loosen in her chest that had been tight for so long she'd stopped identifying it as tightness and had started to just call it herself. June arrived, and with it, a year. 1 year from the Monday morning she'd walked into Walker Consulting for an interview and come out with a job she'd been uncertain about and a name on a frosted glass door she'd knocked on anyway. 1 year from the contract and the salary and Dana saying, wear comfortable shoes, and the long, complicated project of learning that not every structure was designed to trap you. She marked it privately. She didn't make a ceremony of it, but on June 8th she wrote in her notebook, still the same notebook, almost full now, and she wrote more than 3 things for the first time. She wrote a page. She wrote about the restaurant and the park and the elevator that worked 60% of the time, and Lily's clover flowers in the glass on the windowsill, and a kitchen table with a cardboard shim under one leg, where a man had sat across from her and not asked for anything in return for the soup he'd brought. She wrote about what it had cost her to trust again, not the trusting of him specifically, that had come, eventually, with the weight of evidence, but the trusting of herself, her own judgment, the instinct that said this is different when her entire nervous system had been trained by specific painful experience to not trust that instinct. That had been the real work. Harder than rebuilding professionally. Harder than the money, the apartment, the starting over. The internal work of deciding that being hurt once did not mean her capacity to read people was broken. That she had been deceived by someone who was specifically skilled at deception, and that this was a fact about him and not a verdict on her. She was not finished with that work. She suspected she wouldn't be for a long time, but she was somewhere in the middle of it rather than at the beginning. And the middle was its own kind of progress. The community event was Ethan's idea, and it came from a conversation they had in late July on a Saturday afternoon. The 4 of them, Ava and Ethan and Owen and Lily, at a park that was not Millbrook Park, but a smaller one on the west side that Owen had recently declared superior for reasons he had articulated at length, and that largely came down to a specific piece of climbing equipment he referred to as the spider thing. Lily was on the spider thing. Owen was explaining its structural merits to Ava with an intensity she was increasingly recognizing as simply how he engaged with topics he cared about. The rope pattern makes it easier to climb from multiple angles, Owen said. At Millbrook, you can only really go up one way. That's very specific, Ava said. I've thought about it a lot, Owen said, without any self-consciousness whatsoever. Beside her, Ethan said, he wants to be an engineer. I want to be a structural engineer, Owen corrected from 3 feet away, apparently monitoring both conversations simultaneously. There's a difference. There is, Ethan agreed. Then, quietly, to Ava. He didn't know the word structural 4 months ago. He picked it up somewhere, Ava said. The Meridian project documents, Ethan said. He found them on my desk. She looked at him. Your 8-year-old was reading structural analysis documents. I was surprised too, Ethan said. She looked at Owen, who had returned his full attention to Lily and was now coaching her through an approach to the spider thing that involved what appeared to be a carefully theorized sequence of handholds. She's going to come home with opinions about climbing equipment, Ava said. Probably. That's going to be an interesting dinner conversation. It was the casual, unthinking ease of the sentence that struck her a half second after she said it. The way she'd assumed a shared dinner table, a shared evening, the simple domestic fact of both their children at the same meal talking about climbing equipment. She'd said it without constructing it. It had just been there, the natural shape of the thought. She didn't look at him. She felt him not look at her either. There's a family resource center, he said after a moment, on Clement Street. I've been thinking about it for a while. They run programs for people in transition, housing, employment, kids' services. They do good work, but they run on a skeleton staff. He paused. I've been trying to figure out how to do something useful rather than just writing a check. She looked at him now. What kind of something? Consulting, essentially. Pro bono engagement. Help them with the operational structure, the intake process, the way they communicate with families. He paused. The kind of thing that makes the difference between a resource that families can actually access and one that exists theoretically. He looked at the spider thing where Lily and Owen were now both climbing, Lily following the sequence Owen had outlined with careful seriousness. I thought... He stopped. I thought you might have thoughts about it, given your background, given what you know that I don't. She looked at him. What do I know that you don't? What it's like to be on that side of it, he said. Quiet, not careful, just honest. I've watched people struggle. I've never done it the way you have, the specific texture of it. He met her eyes. That matters for something like this, for making it actually useful rather than well-intentioned. She was quiet for a moment. I do have thoughts about it, she said. I figured. The intake process at places like that is usually the thing that loses people, she said. Someone in crisis does not have the bandwidth to navigate a complicated intake. If the first contact isn't simple and clear and fast, they don't come back. She paused. I know because I almost didn't go back to places that could have helped me, because the paperwork was complicated and I was exhausted and it felt like one more thing to manage. He listened without interrupting, the way he always listened. I'll help, she said. If you're doing it, I'll help. He nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. Were you? I've been sitting on the idea for 3 months waiting to have this conversation, he said. So yes. Across the playground, Lily had reached the top of the spider thing and was looking out from the top with an expression of pure satisfaction, one hand raised against the sun. Owen was already on his way back down, declaring something about the optimal descent route that Lily was probably not listening to. Ava watched her daughter up there. The height of her, the confidence, the small body that had spent a significant part of the past year being uncertain and was now, incrementally, becoming sure. She was doing that. Lily was doing it herself, the way children did, with the raw material of whatever stability their parents managed to build around them. But Ava had built some of the material, had made choices that created conditions, had stayed standing long enough to give her daughter something solid to grow from. That was the thing she was most proud of, more than the Meridian account or the raise or any of the professional evidence of her own competence. She'd stayed standing. She'd made it across the year. And Lily was at the top of a climbing structure in July, feeling like the world was manageable. That was the whole thing. That was everything. The resource center on Clement Street was called Haven House, and it was everything Ethan had described and also smaller than she'd expected, operating out of a converted storefront with good intentions and insufficient square footage and a staff of 4 people who were visibly tired in the specific way of people who cared too much about what they were doing to stop. The director was a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been running the center for 7 years and who received Ava and Ethan's offer of pro bono consulting with the cautious reception of someone who had been offered things before that came with conditions she'd discovered too late. Ava recognized the reception immediately. "No conditions," she said before Patricia had finished her careful, qualified thank you. "No branding, no press involvement unless you want it, no expectation of anything in return. We're offering operational consulting because we think we can make what you're already doing more accessible." She paused. "And because I have a specific and personal understanding of what it feels like to need a resource and not be able to figure out how to get to it." Patricia looked at her. "We moved here about 14 months ago," Ava said. "My daughter and I. We were in a difficult period." She kept her voice level. "I found out about Haven House 3 weeks after we arrived. I started the intake form twice and didn't finish it either time because I was running on empty and it was too much." She paused. "I didn't need more services. I found other footing. But the people who need what you're offering most are going to be the ones with the least capacity to navigate complexity. That's where we can help." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You filled out our intake form." "Twice," Ava said, and stopped both times at page 3. Patricia looked at the folder on her desk that presumably contained the intake form in question. Then she looked at Ava. "Page 3 is where we ask about prior housing situations," she said, with the voice of someone who had suspected this for a while and was now having it confirmed. "We added it because our grant requires the data. I've never been happy with it." "Page 3 is where you lose people," Ava said. "We can fix that." They worked with Haven House for 3 months. It was not glamorous work. It was spreadsheets and process maps and a lot of conversations with Patricia and her staff about what they actually needed versus what their current systems were doing, which were frequently different things. Ethan handled the structural analysis and the resource planning. Ava rebuilt the intake process from the ground up, simpler, faster, conducted over the phone if the person preferred, with a specific protocol for people who were mid-crisis and needed a different kind of entry point entirely. She also, in her second week at the center, sat with a woman in the small waiting area whose situation she recognized with the specific precision of her own memory. Single mother. Trying to hold everything together with the focused desperation of someone who had made holding things together into a discipline. Looking at the intake form with the expression of a person who was calculating whether she had the bandwidth for one more complicated thing. Ava sat next to her. "I can help you with that," she said. "It's a lot of pages." "I know." The woman looked at her, assessing, looking for the mechanism. "No strings," Ava said. "I work here as a volunteer. I just know the form." She paused. "I filled it out myself, about 1.5 years ago." The woman looked at her for a moment longer. Then she handed over the form. They went through it together. It took 25 minutes. The woman's name was Diane, and she had a 7-year-old named Marcus, not a name Ava could hear without a small involuntary response that she'd gotten very good at not showing. And she'd been in Millbrook for 6 weeks and needed housing assistance and childcare resources and several other specific things that Haven House could actually provide. When they finished, Diane looked at her and said, "You really did fill this out yourself." "Twice," Ava said, "and couldn't finish it both times." "What was different the third time?" Ava thought about it. "I wasn't alone," she said. The year turned. Summer became fall, and fall became the particular early darkness of November, and Lily turned 7 in October with a birthday party at the park that involved Sophie and Owen and 6 other children, and a cake that Ava had made herself with uneven layers that Lily declared the best cake she'd ever had, which was either a reflection of Lily's generous spirit or a reflection of the fact that Ava had put an entire bag of chocolate chips in it. Probably both. Owen had a falling out with a friend at school in October that hit him hard in the specific way that social ruptures hit children who cared intensely about their relationships. Ethan handled it with a patience that Ava observed from close enough to see the full picture, including the evening he came to her apartment frustrated because he hadn't found the right words, and Owen had gone to bed upset and he felt like he'd missed something. "You didn't miss anything," she said. "You were there. Sometimes that's the whole thing." He needed more than just there. He needed to know that being there was a commitment, she said, not a conditional, that you'd still be there tomorrow when it still hurt. She paused. Kids who've had instability read presence differently. They need it to be repeated before they stop waiting for it to end. He looked at her. "You're talking about Lily." "I'm talking about both of them," she said. "Owen's lost people too. His mom moved. That's a kind of loss even when it's the right call." She looked at her hands. "They're both watching to see if the people they love stay." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he stayed last night?" she asked, "even if the words weren't perfect?" "He was asleep before I left the room," Ethan said. "Then he stayed." He sat with that. She thought not for the first time that this was something she hadn't anticipated about this particular configuration of her life. Not the relationship with Ethan specifically, but the being in each other's dailiness of it. The unglamorous thing. The evenings where one of them was tired and the other one had to hold more weight. The moments where they got it wrong with their kids and needed someone to tell them they hadn't lost something permanent. The specific mess of building something with another person that was real rather than managed. She'd been good at managed. She'd been excellent at the version of a life that was controlled and monitored and self-sufficient. She was less polished at this, at the mutual dependency, the letting someone see the daily underbelly, the being known in the specific way that came from proximity and time. It was harder. It was also, she was learning, the thing that made the rest of it mean something. The proposal was not what she expected, which was probably the point. It was a Sunday morning in December, early, before either child was awake, which meant it was also before coffee was fully finished, which meant Ava was in the kitchen in an oversized sweatshirt with her hair not yet decided and her attention approximately 70% engaged. Ethan had stayed over. This had become, gradually and without formal declaration, a periodic arrangement on weekend nights when they were both at one apartment or the other, and the evening had gone long and easy, and neither of them saw a particular reason to disrupt it. Owen and Lily had adapted to this with the pragmatic flexibility of children who had, between them, navigated enough adult complexity that a new configuration was simply new to be cataloged and adjusted to. She was making coffee. He was at the kitchen table, her kitchen table, the one with the cardboard shim that she'd finally adjusted properly in September, with both hands around a mug and looking at her with the expression she'd learned to read as him working up to saying something he'd been thinking about. "You have the face," she said without turning around. "I'm not making a face." "You're making the face where you've been thinking about something and are trying to decide how to say it." She poured her coffee. "Just say it. You're always better when you skip the architecture." A pause. "Marry me," he said. She turned around. He was looking at her with the same specific steadiness he'd had since the beginning, the look that didn't move, that she'd trusted before she'd consciously trusted anything, not performing certainty, just having it. "That's not a question either," she said. "It's a question," he said. I'm not good at the building up to it. I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation for 6 weeks, and every version I came up with had too much in it." He held her gaze. "I know what I want. You know what I want. The question is what you want." She looked at him across her kitchen. She thought about the restaurant, the park, the interview. The kitchen conversation in November when she'd told him about Marcus Hale with a level voice and he'd said that says something about him, it says nothing about you. The check on the counter, the soup. The Friday evening in the empty office when she'd finally said the things she'd been not saying for months. The Haven House waiting room. The uneven birthday cake. The cardboard shim. The year and a half of small specific evidence that she'd been collecting without letting herself call it what it was. "You're not easy to be close to," she said. "I know. You hold things too long before you say them. Working on it. You make decisions faster than you communicate them. Also working on it. You work too much. Owen keeps a tally. I know, she said. He told me. She set down her coffee. I'm not easy either, she said. I have an I'm fine face. I manage crises internally past the point of reason. I look for the mechanism in things for longer than is warranted. She paused. I will probably do that forever, on some level. I know, he said, and you want this anyway. I want this because of who you are, he said, not in spite of it. All of it. He looked at her steadily. The careful, the complicated, the slow to trust. All of it is you. I want you. She stood in her kitchen in her oversized sweatshirt with her hair not yet decided and her coffee going slightly warm, and she looked at the man at her table. The man who had left soup on her counter and stayed on his side of every line until she was ready to say otherwise, and rebuilt his organizational chart and sat beside her in a hospital waiting area on a Tuesday afternoon without being asked and driven to her apartment because he thought she might not have eaten. And she thought about what she'd written in the notebook months ago, not triumphant, not cinematic, just true. Yes, she said. He exhaled. One breath. She hadn't realized he'd been holding it. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. From the hallway, unmistakably, the sound of feet on carpet. The small, quick feet of a 7-year-old who had been awake longer than she'd let on. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with Gerald the elephant under her arm, and the particular expression of a child who had heard something and was assembling its implications. Are you getting married? She said. Ava looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Ava. Yes, Ava said. Lily considered this with the gravity the occasion warranted. Then, is Owen going to be my brother? Something like that, Ethan said. Lily considered this further. He's going to have opinions about things. He will, Ethan agreed. That's okay, Lily said, with the magnanimity of someone who had decided. I have opinions too. She tucked Gerald more firmly under her arm. Can we have pancakes? The wedding was in March, on a Saturday, in a room attached to the Clement Street Community Center that Patricia Osei had offered without being asked, because it had good light and enough space, and she'd said, when she made the offer, that it seemed right. Ava had thought about it and decided she agreed. It seemed right. It was small, 40 people roughly. Dana was there with her husband, who gave a toast that was characteristically precise and unexpectedly funny and made Marcus Kellerman choke on his wine. Claire sat in the front row with the expression of someone who was deeply satisfied and choosing not to say I told you so, which Ava appreciated and which they both knew was being actively exercised as a restraint. Renata cried before the ceremony started and maintained it was allergies, which fooled no one. Sophie sat next to Lily and Owen and took her role as the person who kept Owen from getting restless with the seriousness that Owen entirely failed to appreciate, and Lily appreciated enough for both of them. There was no perfect weather. It rained in the morning and cleared by noon, and the light in the afternoon was the particular sharp, clear light that came after March rain, everything outlined more precisely than usual against a sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. Ava wore a dress she'd bought herself. Not the charcoal blazer, not a gesture toward the professional armor that had carried her through the worst of it, but something lighter, the color of early evening. She'd thought about the blazer and then decided deliberately against it. The blazer was for surviving. This was something else. She walked in without anyone on her arm, which had been her choice and which no one questioned. She'd made it to this room under her own power. She wanted to arrive the same way. She looked at Ethan at the front of the room, and he looked at her, and the look was the same one. The same specific steadiness that she'd trusted before she'd consciously trusted anything. The look that didn't move. She reached him. Hi, he said quietly. Hi, she said. You look... Don't, she said, because she was going to cry if he said something nice and she wanted to get through the actual ceremony first. He understood this immediately and pressed his lips together and said nothing further, which was, she thought, one of the most loving things he'd done yet. They said what they said. Simple words, the kind that meant what they meant without needing elaboration. No borrowed language, no performed poetry, Just two people who had arrived at this room by specific and improbable routes, making a promise with full knowledge of what promises cost and what they required to keep. She meant every word. She knew he did too. The thing about the story, the full shape of it, the version that could only be seen from the outside or from far enough along the inside, was not the romance. The romance was real, but it was not the point. The point was the woman at the restaurant table calculating the cost of a glass of water. The point was the decision she'd made in that moment, and in every subsequent moment, to keep standing, to not let what had been done to her become the permanent instruction manual for how the world worked, because that was the real loss that a betrayal like the one she'd experienced was trying to inflict. Not the company, not the money, not the professional reputation. Those things could be rebuilt, were being rebuilt, had been rebuilt. The real target was the thing underneath, the capacity to trust, to extend yourself toward other people, to believe that a door someone opened might actually be a door and not a mechanism. She'd protected that capacity by being careful with it for a long time. There was nothing wrong with that. Careful was appropriate. Careful was survival. But careful was meant to be temporary, a posture you adopted while things were dangerous and slowly set down as things became less so. The man in the restaurant had not saved her. She needed to be clear about that in her own accounting, because the version of the story where he arrived and rescued her was a version that erased the 14 months she'd spent holding everything together on her own. He had done something different. He had been consistent. He had sat on his side of every line. He had offered things without conditions and then not collected on the offer. He had been trustworthy, which was harder than being generous. Anyone could be generous. Being trustworthy over time, under pressure, when it cost you something, that was the actual thing. That was what had made the difference. And she had been the one to decide what to do with it. That was hers. The decision to knock on the frosted glass door. The decision to sign the contract. The decision, in a kitchen on a Friday morning after a year of watching, to say, "I like you." Specifically, as a person. The decision to let something be real. She'd made those decisions. Nobody had made them for her. That was the thing she wanted Lily to understand. When Lily was old enough, not that help was coming, not that someone would appear and make things right, but that the capacity to recognize something real when it came and to choose it with open eyes, knowing the risk, knowing the cost, knowing that trust was not a guarantee but a decision made in the absence of guarantees. That was the actual work, the hardest work, the work that nobody saw from the outside. You built what you built. You lost some of it. You rebuilt differently, with different materials, knowing things you hadn't known before, and the new thing had a different shape, and you made your peace with that shape because it was yours, and it was real, and it was standing. On a Tuesday morning in June, 1 year after the Tuesday, they'd stood in front of their friends and said what they meant. Ava drove to Haven House on Clement Street alone. She went on the first Tuesday of every month. She'd been going since the previous summer. Patricia had started scheduling her into the week formally, which Ava had accepted with the understanding that it was for the clients and not about her, which Patricia knew and which neither of them needed to say. She sat with 3 women that morning. Different situations, different specifics, same exhausted carefulness around the eyes that she'd seen in her own mirror and recognized immediately in anyone else who'd been living on the edge of enough for too long. With the first woman, she went over the intake form. Simple version now. 2 pages, phone option, no page 3 in the first contact. They'd restructured the whole thing over the fall, and the completion rate had gone from 40% to 83%, which Patricia had announced at a staff meeting with a level of satisfaction that Ava found more validating than any professional review she'd ever received. With the second woman, she talked about something that wasn't on any form. The specific texture of the thing that happened when the crisis was over and the immediate emergency had passed, and you were left with the work of putting yourself back together when you were very, very tired. "It doesn't happen fast," she said. "I want to be honest about that. There are months where you feel like you're not moving at all." "How long?" the woman asked. Her name was Sandra, and she'd been in Millbrook for 3 months and had just started a job at a dental office that she was scared she was going to lose because she was so tired all the time. Ava thought about it honestly. "For me, about a year before I felt like the ground was mostly solid." She paused. And then longer after that before I stopped waiting for it to give way. Does it stop? Mostly, Ava said. You still have the instinct sometimes. You still check, but it stops being the first thing. Sandra looked at her hands. I don't want to still be afraid a year from now. I know, Ava said. That's not quite how it works. But here's what I know for sure. She waited until Sandra looked at her. You're still here. You came through the door. You're doing the thing even though it's hard and you're exhausted and you're scared. She paused. That's not nothing. That's actually most of it. Sandra was quiet. The year's going to pass anyway, Ava said. It passed for me. You might as well be in motion while it does. She drove home in the Tuesday afternoon light. Lily would be at school for another 2 hours, and Ethan was in a client meeting that ran until 4, and Owen had soccer practice on Tuesdays and would be delivered home by another parent at 5:15, and the apartment would be quiet until then. Her apartment. Theirs now, technically. The lease was in both their names since February because the apartment had become the apartment where everyone ended up, and it made more sense to formalize it. Gerald the elephant was on the couch. Lily had declared him a permanent fixture of the living room rather than a bedroom item, a reclassification that Ava had accepted without comment. She made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, the narrow one over the sink where Lily's clover flowers had sat in a glass for 2 days the previous spring, and looked out at the Dunmore Avenue street she'd driven 100 times, and knew by its specific potholes and its particular quality of light in the afternoon and its small daily population of people going about the ordinary business of their lives. She'd chosen this street. She'd chosen this window, this apartment, this city. She'd made a series of decisions in the worst period of her life that had led, by routes she could not have predicted from inside the worst of it, to standing here. She was not the same person who had sat in a restaurant with $22 in her wallet, calculating whether she could afford to let her daughter order orange juice. She was not unrelated to her either. She was what that woman had become, after everything. After the fighting and the failing and the rebuilding and the slow, patient work of deciding to trust in the absence of guarantees, she carried that woman with her, the exhaustion of her, the stubbornness of her, the refusal to be reduced to the things that had been done to her. That refusal was the inheritance. That was what she had to give Lily, not the rescue, not the story where someone arrived and made it better, but the fact of her own survival, the daily evidence of it, the specific and repeated proof that you could lose something and rebuild, and that the rebuilding was not a lesser version of the original, but a different one, with different knowledge in it, and that knowledge was worth what it had cost. She put her coffee down. She picked up her phone and sent Ethan a message. Home. Good day. 3 dots appeared, then, good, Owen's team won. He'll tell you about it for approximately 45 minutes. She looked at her phone, then typed, I'll make dinner. Tell him to bring his opinions about it. He has many opinions already. Perfect, she wrote. She put the phone down and stood at the window a moment longer, watching Dunmore Avenue do its Tuesday afternoon thing, and then she turned back to the kitchen and started making dinner. The door was open. It had been open for a while now, not thrown wide in the dramatic way of second chances in stories, but ajar, light coming through, the way a door stayed open when someone had decided to keep it that way on purpose, every day because they understood what it was worth. She kept it open. She would keep it open. That was the whole point, but that was all of it.